Very how it goes.
Good. Let's set up my window here. There we go. Going actually pretty good. I got a very nice surprise yesterday.
Really?
Yeah, a decade ago, a documentary filmmaker was planning to make a documentary about the strange goings on Wikipedia, and it was going to call it the Wikipedia game. And initially, it was just going to be about vandalism on Wikipedia. That was the initial concept. But somebody put him on to me, and he came out to interview me. And we sat down here in my house, and he recorded an interview with me that lasted an hour. And it wasn't about vandalism. It was about something entirely unrelated to the initial concept.
Mm-hmm.
The film never got made. They ran out of funding, so they never made the film. But he had this reel, this recording of this interview sitting, in his vault for a decade. And yesterday I got an email saying, I've uploaded it to YouTube. I'd like to go ahead and publish it. Just this 1 hour long interview. And I said, oh, fabulous. Absolutely. I just got through watching it. I said, no edits are required. Just publish it as is. Maybe we will try to develop a text transcript alongside, because sometimes I'll slur a word and people can't recognize a particular word. But if we can add a text transcript, that'd be even better. So as soon as he confirms that we're good to go, I'm going to share the URL. It's unlisted at the moment. But I think he's going to say, yeah, you can share the URL at will.
Sure. That's what topics were addressed?
So the main thing that happened, I don't know if I've ever even shared any of the story with you before. Maybe you know some of it. I didn't do much on Wikipedia except back in, I think, around 2007, during a very idle August where nothing was happening. I just thought I would look up to see if there was an article on affective computing in Wikipedia, which turned out there was. So it wasn't even that bad. But it mentioned the founder of the field, who's a colleague of mine, and it was Blue Link, meaning it was a biography. And so I clicked on it, and I looked at it, and I go, this isn't a biography of Roz. What the hell is this crap? And that launched into a huge 2-year-long drama about what the hell is going on with biographies and the lack of mass media ethics. Junk, not just vandalism. This was stuff being put on by the administrators that was garbage. And it led to quite a story that I spent an hour sort of telling the story, and then the takeaway, what you learn from the story. And so he finally published that hour-long video, which is almost entirely me talking. I think only once or twice he interjected with a question, because I just kept the story going until I told the whole thing and the conclusions from it.
So this is something that would or would not, you think, actually play into one of our themes here in GCC?
I think it would, because the main topic was the lack of ethics in the editors and administrators in Wikipedia. When I say lack of ethics, it's comparable to what's going on in the January 6th investigation, where they're trying to shut down the election. This is trying to shut down academic content and replace it by not the big lie, but false material.
Yeah, I've been aware that that's happened, and I've actually been part of a restoration of some truth.
Yep.
In the past as well, in a minor way, nothing as major as yours.
Yeah.
But
So,
yeah, I'm aware that this goes on.
So anyway, so at some point, if not today, maybe in a day or two, as soon as I get the thumbs up, I will reveal the URL to the at the moment unlisted video, which will go listed probably within a day or two, maybe a week.
Yeah, good.
And if people have an hour where they're kind of better to do, they can listen to me pontificate on this story.
But you said it was a decade old?
Yeah, this was recorded, I think, well, I think it's more than a decade. I can't remember exactly when it was recorded, but The videographer said it's a decade-old interview, so because the events that I was telling the story of took place between 2007 and maybe 2011. So, and I may have told the story several years after the story ended. So yeah, it's probably a decade-old interview.
I think my own personal incident involving Wikipedia was about somewhere between 2008 and 2012, 2013, that time frame.
Yeah. So you might find a lot of overlap between your experience and the experience I relate. But after I tell the basic story of what actually happened, then the insights that come from it are much more general. And I think you'll find those especially relevant to our current conversations.
So I think I know your answer, but just to get it on the record, as a result of that, was there any change in the Wikipedia Code of Conduct?
Not that I'm aware of, but I really haven't paid attention to it since I was banned by Jimmy Wales. And so I don't really know whether they cleaned up their act or not. Somebody else would have to say whether or not they actually changed anything.
Okay.
Sure, at the time I told the story, nothing had changed.
Yeah. Definitely.
And the other thing that had happened in the interim is that Google had launched Google Knoll, which was their version of an online encyclopedia. And I was one of the top rated contributors to that. I had a 5-star rated article. That was the one on emotions learning, in fact. I originated it on Google Knoll, and it was featured on their front page feature. So it would have, that gave me a chance to show, my bona fides as writing Wikipedia or encyclopedia articles. Unfortunately, they shut down Google Knoll after, I think, 3 or 4 years. I'm not really sure why they shut it down. I guess they just, maybe the problem was the same one, that people came in to put up garbage on it and they didn't have any way to regulate the high quality content from the garbage.
So I think that theme plays into what we're trying to talk about here. In order to really advance whatever we're doing, we need some minimal structures, some minimal agreements,
Right.
some minimal guidance on conduct and engagement.
Right.
And that's consistently found.
Yeah. So for example, if you go to university, there's some academic guidelines for, academic behavior, academic context, or whatever the word looking for here. And so if you have a project supposed to be educational, it's nonprofit, educational, tax exempt, then you should adhere to the same kind of standards you expect in academic scholarship in general. And if it turns into a lobbying and propaganda and that kind of nonsense, then you got a problem, because you're not doing legitimate scholarly research.
Okay, so I want to park that idea because I have a lot of interest in pursuing this. But let's welcome Josh and Stacy. They're now here. We were talking about how did we get started on that, Barry?
He just asked if how I was doing, and I said I had a good day today.
Oh, that's right. Barry now will be featured on an hour-long, unedited documentary soon after this link gets posted to YouTube from a recording that got made over a decade ago.
Well,
yeah.
And it's about Wikipedia, specifically what happened with
it. The first part of the story is what happened on Wikipedia, and then the second half of it is the takeaway. The abstract issues that weren't unique to Wikipedia, but are issues in general that we deal with on online social networks and other venues.
Please share that when it's up. I'm interested in listening.
Yeah, I watched it this morning just before this session, and I shot an email back to the documentary maker and said, can I go ahead and share the URL now, or should I wait until you unlist it or unlist it from unlisted? And so probably he'll say you can go ahead and share it with your correspondence. But I don't want to sort of undercut him. I want to sort of let him debut it.
Got it.
Okay. Would anyone like to check in? Since Barry has. Okay, I'll check in. 3 things. as of last week, I am now officially a duck farmer. So the bad news is, as of last week, I had 19 ducks. As of this morning, I can only count 17. So I'm trying to figure out how to keep these duck populations from declining. It turns out that this place
Can
sorry,
you recognize them individually, or are they all anonymous?
I can recognize them only by rough coloration. Like there's a group of 5 blondish, sandy-ish, brownish ducks, and there's about 14, mostly black, but some of them speckled white. I do know the breeds. They're written down. They're breeds I don't know anything about ducks, but I'm trying to learn where to get duck feed and where to get premium pine shavings and tarps and
So at least if you
shell.
count the number by color, you can tell if the numbers per color are constant or perturbing.
Yeah, I'm trying to get there. So anyway, they produce anywhere from 3 to 7 eggs per day. So I'm making friends by giving away duck eggs now, and making a lot of duck egg omelets now, which are actually pretty good. So let me know if you want some duck eggs. I'll make you a special delivery. They are all very fresh, obviously. I collect them daily. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, I'm actually very happy that the local Van Gogh exhibit has been extended for more showings. So I'm taking my daughter and her friend to the Van Gogh exhibit later today. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I've heard rave reviews about it. So I'm gonna go, and I was hoping I'd be able to do it before they exited the area, but I was lucky that they did extend the dates. So now we can do this.
And 3.
There was one at the Museum of Modern Art probably 30 years ago that I saw, but I don't know if this is the same exhibit or just a different combination of paintings.
This is a whole like immersive experience, like with lighting and
Yes, with
So
huge screens and some animations. That's what I understand. The commercials for it are quite compelling. So it has been locally recommended by 2 or 3 of my friends very strongly. So that's why I'm going to go.
and you had 3 things on your agenda. You only gave us 2.
Let's see. The third thing is a potential topic. So I think I will hold that until other check-ins have happened. If that's okay.
I'll check in real quick.
Okay, all right.
I'm considering becoming a geese or goose farmer now that I've heard you're a duck farmer, so that you and I can play some duck, duck, goose. So thank you so much for the inspiration, Sam.
Virtual duck, duck, goose.
Yeah, I'll be back in a little bit. I'm going to get on camera. I just have to take care of some things. I'll be back.
Mhm.
That sounds like a kind of a yoke to me.
Okay, I got stuff to do. So Stacy, how are you?
I'm good. I don't really have anything to check in, although I did do something interesting in one of the groups that I'm in, where there's usually a lot of fighting. And I just asked them, with everything happening with the Supreme Court and, different feelings on states' rights and all that. And in addition, in a lot of talk about decentralization, there's a lot of overlap and inconsistency of thought, if you were to start, with a blank slate. So I just asked them, forget about what we have. What would you think would be the right way? Like what rights do you think should belong to the federal government and what shouldn't? And when the first people answered, I just, I answered the way I would have answered if I were teaching a 5th grade class. Okay, well, what about this? And then when somebody jumped in like the usual nasty way, I just corrected them and I said, no, I didn't ask what we have now. I asked, what would you want? And it turned out to be, I thought it was a really fruitful conversation. And we had a couple of people that, are lawyers that actually jumped in, gave me quite an education in a simple way. Because to be honest, I have not read the Federalist Papers. I have no intention of reading them unless I was doing a paper, which I would only do if I was getting paid at this point in my life. I have no reason, I'm not motivated to do it. So to have this person break it down just factually, no bias, just no, this is what happened, things that I could check quickly. It was really promising. It made me feel good. It made me feel like, you know what, this is worth it. I couldn't do it all the time. I don't want to do it all the time. It's you know, it's a job, but it does work. And it may not change the minds of the people that are really screaming, but people watch. And the other thing I noticed is more people engaged. Voices that I hadn't heard before were like, you know, saying things. And even people that I suspect I would have agreed with on like a different subject, I would ask a question that would make them think, well, what about in this case? And it was just good. There was thinking going on. That's the bottom line. So that's my check-in.
I commend that. I think that's excellent.
Thank
You know, for the longest time in history, not just in this country, but around the world, if an unwed mother gave birth to a baby that she couldn't keep, she put up for adoption. That's pretty common. In fact, I have friends who were adopted. And so if you can put a live baby up for adoption, why can't you put a fetus or an embryo for
Oh,
adoption?
we did.
I found them in the fridge because you had to close one.
So you could, and today it's possible to extract,
Josh, mute.
I just muted him.
it's possible to extract an embryo or a fetus and not kill it, keep it alive in vitro and put it up for adoption.
Yeah, okay.
So you have
Cool,
that's
huh?
not an abortion. You've aborted the pregnancy, but you haven't aborted the life of the embryo. So instead of waiting until birth to put up for adoption, just go ahead and take it out now, put it, you know, in cryogenics or whatever, or foster, you know, care, and put it up for adoption before it comes to full term.
Legally, I mean, those are all questions worthy of discussion. You know, unfortunately, that's such an emotionally charged topic.
Then you'll
That-
find out where they're at emotionally. If they say, "Oh no, we don't care about whether, you know, it's adopted. We care whether the birth mother gives birth." Of course, there's lots of cases of surrogate mothers, you know, where the real mother can't carry the baby, so they extract it and implant it in, say, the grandmother, for example. There's a famous case, or a surrogate mother. So there's lots of examples in, you know, in reproductive medicine where the embryo is brought to term in an artificial or surrogate womb. So I just put it up for adoption that way. What's wrong with that? It's not illegal.
It's more importantly is to find out where they're coming from. So
Exactly.
some people are strictly coming from a point, God says this. So that's one argument. Some people are coming from a point of it's about states' rights.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, everybody's coming from
Yeah.
their own.
Exactly.
So it's complicated. And I keep, that's why I try to take the actual subject out and I try to just talk about it in terms of, it could be any topic.
So you plant the seed and maybe 30 years later, the idea becomes more acceptable than it was when you first brought it up. Because you're right, when I first suggested it in the 1980s, people were saying, "Oh, no, you can't do, you know, we're not gonna consider that." Why not? It's a technological solution, medically available, and can save lives, save the life of the mother, save the life of the unborn baby, and provide reproductive health care that's beneficial to all parties. So
You know
why do you want to outlaw that?
It's a totally separate ethical, moral question, but you're absolutely right. Legally, that option, I've thought of that too. Legally, that option makes sense.
Exactly.
Ethically and morally, it's a whole nother ball of wax, but one thing at a time.
It's like saying, "Oh, never mind COVID, you can't use Zoom. You still have to meet in person because you have to meet in person." You know, it's like, you know, it's against the law not to meet in person.
Sam's
What's
hand
wrong?
is up. Sam's hand.
Well, obviously, the events of the last week plus have been top of mind for many people, which then generates potential solutions like this. I also have a potential solution, and I'm just wondering if it might be too trivially simple, but at the same time, too difficult to implement. Some solutions are simple, but simple is not necessarily easy. So here's the idea, right? We have this thing that many people rail against called the Electoral College.
Yeah.
We also have districting, right? Which both of those mechanisms almost always guarantee that popular opinion doesn't hold. There's always some special case where the minority gets its way. And you can argue about whether the minority should get its way some of the time, and majority doesn't. That's also a viable, debate to have. But I think there would be a curious phenomena if we did the following. Why not have a mandate that says every district, every electoral district must be the same size? Pick a number, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, whatever. That way you get representatives for each relatively sizable element of the population. Don't do it by geography. Don't do it by city blocks or, incorporated townships or whatever. Why not do it that way? You would have a much more quote unquote egalitarian representation if you did it. That doesn't solve the electoral college, issue. That's probably separate, but you can see where if you apply this idea to local and regional and state elections, you would get a fairer representation of what the people might say they want. And then maybe that could then lead into the presidential elections. Now, clearly, the other thing that must happen for this to work is you got to get money out of politics in the way that you can actually buy votes and that you can actually incorporate, and that incorporated entity then becomes something that has legal rights, that the way citizens do. But to me, it seems like a very simple idea to get these districts to be approximately or even exactly the same size would go a long ways. It's not the total solution, but I think it's actually an implementable part of the solution. Over.
There's some very interesting mathematical anomalies that arise, unexpected mathematical anomalies that have been analyzed to death by the scholars. And there really isn't a good solution. You've probably heard of the so-called Alabama voting paradox, and there's a bunch of voting paradoxes of which actual cases arose in history to illustrate.
We have lots of corner cases, but we have one corner case right now that actually applies every single time.
Yeah.
Okay, let's solve that first. Then let's look at the second, third, and fourth order effects.
But Ben Franklin said republics are fragile. Socrates says democracies are fragile. Franklin said republics are fragile. Darwin says living systems are fragile. All these systems have inherent flaws, inherent weaknesses, and inherent irregularities or unfairness by some criteria.
And you know what's common to all of them? None of those voting criteria actually examine the quality of the idea being voted on. None.
Yeah.
They only rely on the number of people that seem to align one way or the other.
Exactly.
So they can't even get to the essence of an issue. They just have to approximate it by how many of these stupid people agree, how many of these stupid people agree. Let's choose the one with the most stupid people that agree.
Yeah.
Never do you actually look at the quality of the idea or the candidate itself.
Yeah, that's the idea of constructing an alternative that hasn't yet been thought of, for which you can get 100% consensus. And it is possible in principle, but rare in practice, for a group of people to sit down and hammer out a consensus, a better idea. So you say, well, I like A and I don't like B, and you like B, but you don't like A. Well, how about C that's better than both, that's superior to both, that has the strengths of both.
Bingo.
Either. And in my career, I was always trying to invent the excluded middle that was better than the alternatives that people were arguing over. And if I could come up with a superior alternative that blended, hybridized the good stuff, and left out the bad stuff, then everybody say, oh yeah, that's even a better idea than I had. Both sides would say that. That ain't easy to do, But if you can do it, then you can resolve it by building a consensus concept that nobody had thought of. And I don't have a mathematical proof or disproof of the existence of such a consensus, but it's sort of an article of faith that, well, at least if you don't look for it, you're not going to find it. Sam or Stacy, I
Well,
guess.
Stacy, go first, but I would like to address that very issue.
Yeah, I'm going to address that very issue too, and then I'll stop and then you can go and then I'll come back to my first point. To that issue, I try to do the same thing just in my way of being. And what I found is necessary is to weed out those ones that aren't thinking at all, that are just there to be contrary. And
Yeah.
if you can weed out those, then you have a chance of being able to come up with that third model, which is what I was trying to do in the example I gave earlier.
Yep.
Sam, and then I go back to my original point.
Okay. That is fundamentally the idea behind what I've referenced as global sim. That we each have a way to improve other people's models, other people's thinking. And that way we actually co-create together. And by the way, that's essentially this one pillar that I'm calling co-sense making. That's why the new group is called co-sense making for me, okay? And I want to say one more comment, okay? I have a friend named Jeffrey Huang. He's a graduate of Beijing University, and he did some work that is based on Nash's theorem that is at the basis of all modern quote unquote economics, right? Nash's theorem says, if you got everybody acting selfishly, we reach some sort of local stable point. Right?
Daytime.
The problem with Nash's theory, according to Jeffrey, and I have not yet studied this adequately, although I've studied it some, is that that stable point is not guaranteed to be an optimum stable point. It is only stable within some, perturbation radius, okay? What Jeffrey says he's come up with using new methods, quote unquote, from quantum approaches, meaning you look at how systems settle into stability. He says he now has a way to constructively create a global optimum. So on two fronts, it's actually quite interesting. Nash's proof is not a constructive proof. It doesn't tell you how to get to stability. It only says it exists. Jeffrey says with his approach, he can actually construct it. Secondly, it's not just a local optimum, it's a global optimum. So that's a very short paper. It's about 2 or 3 papers. And there are very few people I would actually send this paper to, but Barry, if you'd like to, I would like to send you this paper, see if you can actually make sense out of it.
Sure. It's not terribly dissimilar from my own PhD thesis at Stanford, which was quite similar in the sense of finding an optimum using the mathematics of Lagrange, but updated to the 20th century. Yeah. So Lagrange says there exists a set of prices. If you could find them, everything, the supply and demand would be equal, but you have to guess the prices. And so if you guess wrong and supply and demand aren't equal, how do you compute a better price? Is much going to be as close to the equilibrium point as possible. And the answer is,
Can you say it again?
Computer, stop. Sorry.
and the answer
What did you
is,
say?
you want me to go back a bit?
Right when the computer interrupted me, I lost it. Sorry about that.
He didn't say anything. He didn't say, he
Okay. All right.
So
Keep
the
going.
point is that Lagrange, by a similar argument, says there is a price where everything is in balance, but he doesn't tell you how to get it, only that it exists. And so you can guess the price and you discover, well, you're off a little bit. And the question is, if you can see how much you're off, can you come up with an algorithm which will optimally converge in as few steps as possible? And the answer is yes, you can. And that was the subject of the math of the algorithm, my PhD thesis at Stanford, is the method of revising the guess optimally so that you get to the balance point.
This is what
reliably.
ML is all about these days.
Well, so my original question that I waited on to give you a turn to speak was, I liked your idea. And what I was thinking in my head, though, is there a point at which it either it's either too small or too large for it to work? Like, is there, like when you were talking about making, a certain number, is there a point where that number becomes too big, it doesn't work anymore? Or if it's too small?
It's the quantum end, where you get down to only 3, and then you get the Condorcet paradox. If you got a huge population, onesies and twosies almost never matter. But if you get down to 3, onesies and twosies absolutely matter. And you get this paradox of Condorcet, where 2 out of 3 prefer A, 2 out of 3 prefer B, and 2 out of 3 prefer C. So it's circular. The preference is circular, and then that turns up at the quantum level.
But there's other ways to solve that problem.
Well, I guess I'm just saying that I would think that there should be some simulated models to just check it out first.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what global sim is all about. That's why
That's
sim is
what,
in the
that's
name.
what mathematicians do in these. There's this whole theory of social choice theory, which is how a collective comes up with a choice that amalgamates the individual preferences of all the participants. And that turns out to be a problem for which there is no guaranteed solution that doesn't violate some axiom that you don't want to be violated. It's a very famous result for which Kenneth Arrow got the Nobel Prize.
Right. May I continue?
Yes, please.
The one problem with that constructive proof is it more or less assumes that there is a way to measure or evaluate optimality.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally the problem, right?
Need a
Because
metric.
you value is different than what I value, is different than what Stacy values, is different than what, XYZ over there values. So there is a very difficult problem because I'm optimizing for my value set. You're optimizing for yours. Stacy's optimizing for hers. And none of that is really visible. That's a problem.
If you put a metric on the value system, you can solve it for equivalue. But
Yes.
if preferences don't have a metric, they're simply, I prefer A to B, but I don't have a metric for how much difference, then you have this quantum problem, and without a metric, you can't come up with an optimal solution. You need to agree on a metric. If you
But
can't,
we can approximate. We can get better and better and better with approximations. And you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think that is the key point, is to make our value sets more explicit, transparent, and then say, not only am I modifying your mental model or your set of mechanisms for your prediction on, let's say, weather, okay, but I'm adding my evaluation criteria, the amount of rain, the amount of sunshine, average temperature, whatever it is I'm trying to optimize, okay? And you might be optimizing something different. Could be growth of livestock. It could be, degree of floodingness, or blah, 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 right? So if we make not only the model, but the evaluation metrics transparent, now we have a chance.
yeah,
Now we really have a chance.
yes. And
Until we do, we're just arguing.
Yeah. Yep. So coming up with a shared metric is a real bugaboo.
It will never happen. Will never happen that we have shared values globally, in my opinion. Unless it's mandated, okay? It'll never happen. Somebody will evaluate fun, okay? I want to maximize fun in my life. Somebody also evaluate hedonism, the amount of pleasure they can extract from life. Somebody else will evaluate longevity, right? Somebody also evaluate, I don't know, wealth.
Sustainability.
No.
Of the system.
Yeah. So if we make that all transparent, now we can actually have these crossways interactions and evaluations and perturbations. And now you could actually slide your evaluation and your model. Okay, this is the, what is it? Gradient descent is one method.
Yeah.
Of that.
Yep.
But if you don't have this transparent, then everybody's guessing and everybody's evaluating according to their own secret evaluation criteria. And then it's like, oh, you don't make sense. Why do I not make sense? Well, because I'm not making my value system apparent to you. So we're just arguing at that point.
Yeah.
Over.
What about if instead of evaluating for values, you evaluated for the goal?
Same thing, though. You have to measure whether or not something you create, a model, is likely to reach that goal.
It depends on whether reaching the goal is, if reaching the goal asymptotically is satisfactory, that's one thing. If reaching the goal 100% with no, partial, asymptote, that's a huge difference. Like in football, you got to go over the goal line. You can't get asymptotically close to it, and it doesn't count. So you have these subtle little mathematical distinctions, which determine what. So if I have a goal, I want to become a millionaire, and I only become a $990,000 heir, does that really matter? Or do I really want to hit that exact number? And sometimes you have to hit the exact number. It's like the lottery. If you pick a lottery number that's off by 1, you don't get anything.
You
Whereas
still get some.
you could have a lottery where if you're off by 1, you get a little bit, you get 99% of the jackpot. So those are huge factors, which tiny perturbations can make a huge difference in the meaning of the outcome, and you got to somehow deal with that.
So I ask you a possible non sequitur.
Sure.
Do lotteries exist in nature?
I guess for a sufficiently vague definition of lottery, yes. After all, I mean, mating is a kind of a lottery. It's not entirely a lottery because it's not just 100% chance.
Well, the beneficiary of the win, quote unquote, isn't necessarily benefiting like 1 millionfold versus their competitors in nature. That's what I'm wondering about.
Well, I mean, yeah, if it's life or death, I mean, if the lottery essentially is life or death, then I think there may be, you could probably find in nature life or death lotteries.
Except those are not rare. See, lotteries are intended to be rare, but life and death situations occur in nature all the time.
Sure. If you're sitting in the tree that gets hit by lightning, you get toasted. So the bird in this was in that tree, gets burned up, and the bird that's in that tree escapes, and it's a lottery, which where the lightning bolt's going to hit. So yeah, you can come up with life and death lotteries, but I'm not sure if it gets down to how you want to define a lottery.
There's a reason I ask that. Is if we believe that nature has, quote unquote, evolved billions of years of wisdom and constructed ecosystems that work, okay, then biomimicry is a source of inspiration if we want to build social systems that hope to achieve the kind of stability that nature has achieved.
Right.
But if we actually install lotteries simply because systems gotten so far out of whack, then now you have to install these lotteries for people to even hope to have some ladder out of poverty or some balloon out of this miserable existence.
Yeah.
That's, to me, unnatural.
There was a lottery for the draft during the Vietnam War. They introduced a lottery for whether you're going to get drafted and go to Vietnam. And it was based on your birthday. They did a 365 number lottery and ranked them, and turned out that my birthday was way down at the bottom, 287. So I knew that I was well below the cutoff. But before the lottery, you had no idea whether you were going to be high in the lottery or low in the lottery. And you didn't know where the cutoff was going to be either.
That's where I think it's important to start thinking about size and limiting size of things. Well, will take away some
But
of that.
still making the cut. The story is the rookie didn't make the cut and didn't get on the team. So wherever you have a cut, that's, there's going to be one character just above the cut, one character just below the cut.
Okay, so you're talking about stepwise functions, non-continuous functions.
Exactly.
And those are still relatively common.
Yep.
In fact, millions of people go through the draft. Millions of people get picked or not picked for teams. But I'm talking about a draft, they don't approximate the lottery from those two criteria that I mentioned, that they're rare and that the winner benefits unbelievably more than the losers, like a millionfold plus.
Yeah.
Some of these lotteries are now like, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars now.
you'd be hard pressed to find that in nature where.
Exactly. That's my point.
Although mutations might be an example. So you might have a mutation that's fatal, but you also might have a mutation that gives you a fabulous new set of characteristic powers and abilities, like the ability to fly or something like that. So yeah, you might get a fabulous win in the genetic lottery of a mutation, where you create a new species that's just going to completely dominate the previous generation.
But not an individual in that species though, right? If my genes mutate, it's not going to express itself likely in my lifetime, is it?
Well, if you have an offspring who becomes, essentially Superman or something, unbelievably powerful, brilliant, whatever, you give birth to Einstein, something, or Feynman or Newton. So that's a kind of a lottery where there's a very rare chance that your offspring will become a world-class genius, a Stephen Hawking, a Feynman, or whatever. And you could sort of imagine that, in the biological world, there is a mutation that makes this plant, completely, outdo every other member of the previous generation. If you ask a biologist, maybe they can even give you some examples of that. Go ahead, Sam.
I'm full of mind-hopping distractions right now. Am I permitted to do another non sequitur?
Sure, by all means.
Stacy, is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. So while Barry was talking, I was thinking about the following. Our existence has more or less approximated the way we understand human systems of existence. Like, for example, if you take the digestive system, sometimes it's rooted in the first, no, it's not really, but just existence. Okay, talk about it as way down here in the lower parts of the body, mapped to the first chakra. Okay, and we had to guarantee or at least work towards our survival, and none of the other chakras actually made sense because we were so busy worrying about just plain old existence. Let's suppose that existence was more or less attained. We could more or less count on it so that we could rely on, let's say, choosing what food we want or choosing the recreation we want with some kind of, I don't know, second chakra effects. You guys know what that is. Or even third chakra, which is now your gut. You're able to, pick food that tastes good, okay? And now you've got the lower chakras taken care of. You can now, quote unquote, advance to the higher chakra and worry about those kinds of issues. Now, after that, maybe comes more heart. You can actually now feel more empathy towards the environment or each other. You can now try and optimize that sort of relationship and that manifestation in your life. And perhaps you then move up toward learning, throat, first chakra, brain, that sort of thing. And you can now say, okay, now I want to gain insights. I want to gain wisdom. I want to gain knowledge. I want to gain, practices that help me live life to the fullest. Okay. Suppose we took that very rough, possibly very approximately and very wrong model and applied it to society or civilizations and say, first of all, of course, civilizations have to assure their own existence. Then they have to share some sort of peace of mind or some sort of pleasure among their population so they don't get unhappy and they're content, etc. And then they learn, and then they actually, set up good ecosystems with the environment, and then they actually try to become wiser and better for other animals and other species in the planet, etc., etc. Suppose we take both the individual model as well as the civilization model and try and say, okay, where are we in our evolution? If this is a set of levels or chakras or focus points, can we consider that as we move from one to another, that it's kind of a leveling up? Yeah. Not that you abandon all the other stuff, but that you continue to do well there, but you now get new focus to apply your newly released energy and creativity and force, okay? And if we are, how do we foster that?
Just one minor change to that model that I want to make, just a small thing, is just to acknowledge that we're born with all the chakras working fine.
Correct. Correct.
So but I want to make that clear because I don't want to make it like we're born and we have to work our way up to being able to feel empathy. So with that
Because
one,
nature's done a pretty damn good job of ensuring that each individual has the benefit of those billions of years of evolution.
right. So but I just want to make it clear that after being born, that chakra gets all blocked.
Yeah, yeah.
And that we're blocked, you know, as a
Yeah.
society, we're supporting the blockage
Yes.
of that. Yeah.
And not only that, because we're so familiar with how we work on just plain old existence, okay, that people who don't realize that, you know, that's almost pretty well taken care of now. We can actually worry about other things. We still have people because of that old mindset that believe that hoarding resources is a good thing.
Right.
Because it more or less ensures their existence and survival and maybe their offspring. Okay. But it's not giving them, according to the way I think, and maybe you think, and a small population of us, it's actually not allowing them to realize their full potential in the other chakras, like empathy, like the heart chakra, like wisdom, like ecosystem engagement, you know, because they're so rooted in this old mindset that they have to worry about hoarding physical resources, i.e.
Right.
wealth.
Right. Well, I want to hear Barry's answer. I just wanted to inject that. I think it's important.
The model that Sam outlined, probably the best known published version of it is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We probably have both, I'm sure you've both seen it. And
Which has also seen much criticism, yes.
yeah, but the point is, it's the same idea that you can name the levels. I think Maslow, I think, has 5 or 7, I forget the number.
Yeah.
And you can vary the, you know, the description of each of the individual levels, however you like. The top one, as I recall, is self-actualization. And here's the interesting thing about self-actualization. Very few people get there. But if you do get there, you become a target. And there's a high probability you'll be assassinated if you get to self-actualization. And if you look at the famous people who were assassinated, you know, in history, they were the people who got all the way to self-actualization, you know, like Gandhi and King and Lincoln, and, you know, pick your favorite Socrates, pick your favorite example, Galileo. And so you might think that as you solidify your lower level needs, you get up to self-actualization, life becomes more and more dangerous.
Yeah,
Look
in
at
fact, there was
look at Cassidy Hutchinson, self-actualization. She goes out and she's her own person. Now she's a target. And she knows she's going to be a target.
Yep. Yep. In fact, who said it that was it Krishnamurti or somebody else? Maybe it was Hemingway who said he doesn't know of any intelligent person who's actually happy.
Yeah, yeah.
Who said that?
I think it was either Hemingway or somebody of that same sort of.
Yeah, it would be more Hemingway than a Krishnamurti.
Something like it's rare. Not that it never happens, but it's rare. Happiness in intelligent people is rare. I think it's something like the
The
quote.
more, well, they, you know, ignorance is bliss, right? That's the other half of it. But the more you know, the more you see how suffering and dysfunction and other undesirable things are happening. And the more you really wish you could improve things and fix things, and you realize you're lucky to fix the toaster in your own damn kitchen. You know?
Yeah. So let me back up a little bit. There's 2 possibilities that we're talking about. One was on this voting system idea, and we could fix voting systems. We look at anomalies of them. One of them would be, let's make districts all the same size, okay, which would eliminate a large number of problems and get rid of gerrymandering, or completely rid districting of geographical roots. In other words, just say, okay, here's District 1. And the first 10,000 people that say, okay, I'll be part of District 1, now that's District 1, okay? Here's District 2, go sign up. And if you really want to do it with some of your buddies, do it with your buddies, okay? But just form districts all the same size. And now you can actually select representatives out of them or vote issues out of them. That's one. Let me finish my thought, okay? Option 2 was to incorporate the quality of the actual idea in the decision-making process, i.e., is this idea really a good one versus how many people agree with this idea? Those are 2 fundamentally different approaches. And election systems are all about how many people agree. And we don't yet have a good mechanism to say, how good is the idea? Over.
Yeah, the districting thing is really kind of interesting. And again, it's sort of because of the anomalies, because you have to have a finite and relatively small number of districts per state or per geographic area. And so if you have 15 districts, the 16th would be a district representative isn't going to be there. So he would prefer 16 slightly smaller districts. So he's in this game versus the 15 slightly larger ones.
And we can do that. We can do that.
This business of determining how many states have how many districts and roughly equal size, that's not the issue. The issue is when the population across the country changes and some states grow faster or slower than others, they might gain or lose the number of congressmen, and so they gain or lose. And those turn out to be extremely challenging because there is no reliable mathematical algorithm for producing an outcome that makes any kind of sense at all. You can have
always approximate though. I mean, any approximation towards those lines is better than the system we have today.
Yeah, so you have 2/3 of a congressman for 2/3 of a non-existent
That's fine too. Or allow a range, plus minus 5%, in district sizes, whatever,
But yeah, I mean, the example cases, and by the way, the founders sort of argued over these details because the particular algorithm that you choose has different outcomes for real cases. And there's a really nice YouTube video showing where you get completely nonsensical results depending on whose method you use. And there's like 3 or 4 canonical methods, none of which are 100% satisfactory.
I'd be willing to try because we get completely nonsensical results right now.
Exactly.
We're starting from a very low bar. Okay.
So yeah, so you can't, there's no such thing as a perfect system. They all have anomalies. And sometimes the anomalies are the difference between Roe versus Wade and being overturned. It's one, like one vote is the difference.
Well, sometimes it's the system and sometimes it's corruption of the system.
Yeah, well, corruption is easy to point out. It's when everybody is playing the game lawfully, according to the rules, and still cleverly choosing one move changes you from losing to winning or winning to losing.
I think that's still okay. As long as people are willing to follow the system that works and willing to refine it, with good analysis based on, what's non-optimal, that's a system that works. That's what the amendments were for, okay? But corruption was not foreseen to the extent that it's actually in display today.
That's a real problem. That even an ethical system has problems, but as soon as you lose ethics, and ethics can be degraded slowly, not dramatically. You can have a slight reduction in ethics. For example, is log rolling ethical? Okay, I'll vote for your thingy if you'll vote for mine, even though both of them are really, not in the country's best interest. So you get these pork barrel politics, which is not illegal. But you say, is pork barrel politics ethical? Well, it's certainly not in the best interest of all the other states who are losing out to these two people who decided to ally themselves and support each other to the detriment of everybody else. So ethics is a really, really difficult thing. And also ethics is an asymptotic goal. You're not 100% ethical. There's an asymptotic goal, and there will be departures from ethics, which are for the, just to get to an answer, just to avoid doing nothing, to avoid deadlock and gridlock.
Yeah.
Same.
So in my mind, the possibility of corruption is magnified by the degree of obscurity in the system.
Yes, that you can get away with
Which
it.
is why one way, not necessarily the only way, but one way to quote unquote fix corruption is to bring more transparency, to bring to light, literally.
Yep.
Everything that happens. The other thing was, back when this was happening, it took months or weeks for communications to go from one place to another.
Yeah.
Okay, so deals could be done and struck and assets transferred before the population knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Now we have a much better mechanism to make transparency possible if we're willing to stomach the consequences.
Which is being flooded with more information than you can possibly digest it every day.
But at least it makes it possible for some oversight to take place.
Yeah.
And either we want that oversight and we want the system to work, or we don't care, in which case we just become slaves again. And most of us are not caring, or at least not able to do something about it. What am I doing? I'm not doing anything about it yet. I got to figure out what I can do.
Yes. Find your calling and wrestle into the world.
Do what you can with what you got from where
Yeah.
you are.
I'm a hummingbird. So these are my raindrops.
So, yeah, we live in a suboptimal society, and you're never going to get to optimality. You might get there asymptotically, but more often than not, because of greed and corruption and selfishness and all this kind of stuff, you're far, far below the optimum.
I'm okay with suboptimality. I realize this is the way it's going to be. The
Right.
problem is the second derivative. I want the second derivative to be positive, not negative. Okay?
Yeah.
I want us to be learning, growing, not descending into slavery again, or feudalist systems again, or might makes right again, or even genocide.
And when the second derivative goes negative, your emotional state goes negative. The second derivative goes positive, your emotional state goes positive. Emotion is essentially an everyday word for the second derivative.
Yeah, that's right. It's called hope
Yeah.
if it's positive.
If things are looking good, looking up. And when things are looking down and you can sort of see that things are curving down, that's the frowny face, right? And if things are looking good, it's concave, convex. That's the happy face. So literally it's the happy faces, sad faces curving down versus curving up. That's the second derivative of emotions. Right there on your face.
So I do think that some of these ideas are worth exploring, but we have to sort of figure out how to effectively explore them.
Yeah, and explore them in a way that's interesting, entertaining, and not bogged down in so much math that Stacy's eyes glaze over. Which is 95% of the population are eyes will glaze over if you go into the math.
Wait. Can I say something to that? It may not be a problem. And in fact, I'm not even saying that Stacy's eyes are glazing over. But if Stacy trusts your math, or she trusts my model, or we do some sort of collaboration that says, yes, our idea is better than each of our individual ideas. If Stacy trusts that process,
Yeah.
she could essentially give us her proxy,
Yes.
which is what a voting system is.
Yeah.
She's now voting for people she trusts or models that she trusts. That's a better way. So if each of us could say, I'm not familiar with the issues on Proposition 13, but I trust that my neighbor who's actually been working this quite a bit has, so I'm going to, on that issue, give her my proxy. But on the presidential side, maybe I don't agree with her assessment of the presidential thing, but I'm going to give my proxy on the presidential election to Joe over here, because I know Joe and I have very similar values and he's looked at the candidates in depth. I think individual issue by issue proxy, which is complex to implement, would be a far better system. And it would be based on trust. Over.
You're bringing up a point that I wanted to speak to. So yeah, Stacy's eyes do glaze over sometimes, but what's different is I have the time and space to think. And I can ask you questions. I don't just have to say, oh, I trust you. You must know what you're talking about, because that wouldn't work, even for me and even with the two of you. That being said, I think that's how average people feel. We need to be able to engage them in thinking too. There's good ideas out there. So yes, after that thought process happens, to be able to choose people that could be their proxy, I think is a great thing. So when you bring up those two ideas, I think they both have to happen together. So, go ahead, Sam.
I didn't want to cut you off. I wanted to speak after you're done.
I pretty much said what I wanted to say. The most important thing being that as we explore ideas, that should be transparent as well. Because in the discussion of the ideas, new ones are generated that could lead to the third model that Barry's talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So here's the thing that I want to at least caution on my own proposal, okay? Some people would say what I just described is the electoral college. I ain't gonna agree with that, okay? But I just want to address that right up front, because some people watching this later on are gonna say, what you're describing is the electoral college. It's by far not.
Well, and this, so for me, this speaks to the numbers again. And you put up a meme and it was about, trying to remember exactly how it was. It was about, you know, if you think that the abortion issue is about federal versus states' rights, give
right.
those to the states. No, give those to the counties. No, okay.
Give those
Forget
to the
about-
cities. No, give those to the neighborhoods. No, give those to the blocks. No, give those to the families. No, give them to the individual woman.
Right, but let's take away the abortion issue for a minute. Let's take away other issues. Because even when it comes to like EPA regulations, let's say, I could see there are times where it's happened where EPA federal regulations have hurt in situations that it shouldn't have even been a situation, but because of regulations, like for example, I'll give you a perfect example. I couldn't hire somebody to take a rat out of my pool because they needed a certain license. That kind of regulation shouldn't be a federal regulation, in my opinion. And I think many people would agree. My point is, maybe it shouldn't be between state and federal, because with the state, there's too much of a possibility of corruption. But let's say it was with the city or the county. I'm thinking, if you live in a city, you're not going to vote for something that's going to pollute your lake or destroy your lake that you're living at. So I'm wondering if there's, if maybe it's not an all or nothing thing, like maybe the state is not, it has to be broken down more so that decisions actually affect the people that are voting for them in a way that wouldn't be corrupted because their own needs are the ones that are going to be hurt by it. I'm trying to speak to this whole idea of like when people say, oh, let's build housing for, you know, low cost housing, but they don't want it in their neighborhood. I'm trying to think of how do you get around that? Like, this is where it is. This is where the vote is. You know, I don't have the answer, but I think there's something in it to what you said about these smaller blocks of voting. There's something in it there. I don't know what it is, but there's some kind of hybrid model.
So I think you're actually talking about the quality of the idea again. You're not talking about the number of people who want to vote on an issue, but the quality of the idea, i.e., should this housing project be built at this address, right? That's quality of the idea. Okay.
I'm talking
Yeah.
about both. I'm really talking about both because everything blends in together. And
Yeah, it does. But fundamentally, you're incorporating the merits of the idea itself, which right now cannot be done in the current electoral process, right?
Correct.
All of that happens pre-election in the actual write-up of Measure A, Measure B, Proposition 1, Proposition 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Once that's done, usually by one or two or three very special interest, you know, funded individuals in a very non-transparent process, then it's released for elections where people cannot then say, oh, I could improve this idea by doing X, Y, Z. They don't have that option anymore. They have to take it as written.
you know what's one thing we could do to make things better? Demand that everything's written in simple English that people understand. That would go a long way.
Well, first we'd have to establish English as an official language of the country.
I don't think that's it. I don't think that would be an issue. But seriously,
It has been an issue for 250 years, right?
But even in the conversation that I was talking about earlier, it helped to have somebody break it down for me. if I'm spending all of my intellectual energy trying to figure out what something says, how can I possibly think about what it really means? I'm too busy trying to figure out, trying to follow it. Let's make it easy to understand. There's no reason for all this legalese, except that it's not meant for us to know how to use it. It's meant for people to be able to find the loopholes.
It's meant to obscurify.
Yeah.
Let me go back to one other point, if I may. Your question, which is when you meet with someone you disagree with, and you say, let's forget the present. Let's take a look at what we would like to co-create together. What if we had that, right? That has been something that I have really wanted to do now for the last 5 years here in this particular forum, okay? And believe it or not, it has met with resistance. And that's been a source of frustration for me. I just want to go that on the record, because now with the people here, I don't get that same resistance. But I have gotten it quite strongly before in the past. In fact, the criticism was, that's too abstract. I can't deal with abstraction. Tell me something that happened in your real life. That's one way of thinking, but we've got to consider other ways of thinking. And what if analysis, what if thinking is a very valuable way of thinking and a very valuable way of collaboration. So I just wanted to point that out very, very strongly. I think your suggestion, your approach is very good there. And I strongly agree with it. And I think that's something we can do now. Over.
There's a very interesting dichotomy in the power of government versus delegating authority to technical agencies. I'll name 2 or 3 technical agencies. The National Weather Service, the Federal Reserve Bank, NASA, maybe a few others. And initially when
NIH.
NIH. So in some cases, having Congress develop the regulations is way too technical and way too analytical, and in some sense, way too mathematical for congressmen to do it because they don't have the expertise or the ability to do that. So they create an agency like NASA or the National Weather Service. What was the one you said? Atomic Energy Commission. Yeah, CDC. So now when they created NASA, the first thing was to get to go into orbit. And then the big one was, we're going to go to the moon, which probably wasn't the best idea. We've never done it since. And it turned out to be very dramatic, but eventually NASA got control of their own agenda. And they said, we're going to put up space telescopes. We're going to send reconnaissance to orbit Venus and Mars. We're going to do things which are to develop knowledge, but not to be dramatic. And gradually they got autonomy. National Weather Service, the Congress doesn't tell them what weather models to use, but give them a certain budget. And eventually the technical people work out what's the best thing we can do with that amount of money that provides the best result for our charter. And unlike the EPA, where the Supreme Court says to the EPA, you cannot use this regulation. You have to let Congress do that regulation about use of coal or whatever. That basically undermines this concept of delegating very technically arcane management to people who know what the hell they're doing. The European Space Agency got that Webb telescope into space and a bloody thing worked. Imagine that Congress was responsible for designing the Webb telescope. I mean, it would never happen. It wouldn't spend a lot of money. They'd argue about it, and you would not have anything that worked.
And sorry, no, let me speak when you're done.
Oh, so the notion that legislation should be, somehow hold all of the marbles. No, the legislators don't have that much detailed knowledge. You have to delegate down to groups of professional experts who can figure out the engineering, the mathematics, the science, the budgeting and all that stuff, the hiring of the right people who have the right kind of brains to solve the right kind of problems. And our government is sort of wavering between what power to give to the 3 branches of government and what to delegate to subject matter experts and give them license to do the ethical, best, analytical, scientific, mathematical practices. That's a real problem in our system. And that's where the abortion thing comes. Should that be a medical thing? Or should the legislators of Texas decide medical things? Go ahead, Sam.
So in the legislative branch, I believe there's something called the CRS, the Congressional Research Service. They do commissioned research to gather information and facts so that Congress can create legislation. In the executive branch, I believe we still have something called the OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy. They are supposed to, understand what's going on in science and technology and then advise
Yeah.
the execution of the presidential organization, administration. I don't know if there's a equivalent in the Supreme Court, what's it called, the judicial branch. I believe it's called the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. But there might be something that's much more scientific, but I think it's more investigative. But this is how you sort of have to advise the people who hold power.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you take a look at what else is at play. In Congress, I believe 99%, this is a number that's been bandied about and hasn't been objected to. 99% of Congress people come from a legal or lawyeristic background. In China, I believe over 80% come from technical backgrounds. Engineering, academics, very few of them are actually lawyers.
Yep.
So they have people who can understand the reports that are being produced by the equivalent of CDC, CRS, FBI, OSTP.
Right.
Whereas today, if you create those reports, these Congress people have their administrative staff read these papers. They don't actually understand it themselves.
Correct.
It's a huge gap.
Yeah.
In how we get informed policymaking and informed legislation passed. It's a real reflection on the fact that we don't value science, truth, practicality. We value fighting. This is what lawyerism seems to be, my rights, your rights, my wealth, your wealth, et cetera, et cetera. We're not valuing science and technology and medicine and ecosystems and nature, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, sorry for the rant.
I just want to make a very quick observation on how well this committee, and it is a bipartisan committee, no matter what anybody says, is working together. They're working very well together. And the two Republicans are really taking a lead in this hearing. So the right personality types with the right intention can work together.
Yeah. But they were only able to get two Republicans out of, there's almost an equal number. Well, not an equal number, but there's a lot of Republicans in Congress, and they only got three, and then one of them ended up not being on the commission.
Well, but it's like you said, you have to be willing to ruin your career.
Yeah.
To make yourself a target. Those are all, that takes a lot of courage.
Speaking the truth to power is a very dangerous undertaking. And they all know that.
Exactly.
But that's also why they're letting Republicans take the lead, because if the Democrats were leading the thing, then the Republicans could say it's a witch hunt.
No, this is, like I said, they're all working together and it's done beautiful. It's really.
Democrats are very smart in letting Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger take the lead on interviewing the witnesses.
That's a word I'm not yet able to personally agree to when applied to Democrats.
All right, well, let's pivot because I don't want to take this as going down the wrong road. I just wanted
No,
to.
I do want to agree with you though, Stacey. It's being done very well. In fact, did you guys hear Kinzinger's interview on Colbert? He was very articulate and he was very good.
I think I did play that, although I don't tend to memorize these interviews.
He and both he and Cheney both agree that if we don't do this properly, democracy itself clearly is at stake. And very few people believe that. It truly is. Josh,
Republicans at stake. Do you want to save the republic? This is what Franklin said, I've given you a republic if you can keep it. And here we're trying to keep the republic and keep the democratic voting system running as advertised and not corrupted.
Joshua?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just listening and it sounds so familiar to me. I'm like, where have I heard this conversation before? I'm like, oh yeah, when basketball season was here and everyone was talking about their teams and which players are doing what and who scored the last and who worked out harder. And, it's a real sport now, this Democrat, Republican, democracy, republic, politics is a sport.
Law,
I'm just,
No, it's not.
yeah,
it's lawfare.
It
well,
should
who's going to
not
win?
be.
Is there a winner and a loser? There's election. There's winners and losers.
When a
It's not a
team
sport.
wins a
You're the
basketball
loser.
league, our lives are not truly affected.
How do you know that?
I do know that.
But we're becoming a third world country in many regards. After Roe versus Wade, we dropped, to a third world country.
I'm just saying it's quite the sport. It's got rules, it's got players.
If you
it's
think the
got
stakes are low, then yes, it
winners
is
and
a
losers.
sport.
I didn't say so about the stakes. I'm not making a value judgment on whose sport is better. I'm not saying basketball is better than hockey or politics are better than science, but it's a sport.
It's a competition, it's a contest, it's winners and losers.
Yeah.
It's lawfare. And lawfare is a term that only came into my vocabulary maybe, I don't know, less than 10 years ago. And when I first heard the concept of lawfare, I wrote a little blog, saying this is what lawfare is. I didn't make up this word. And yeah, it's chess. You're playing chess with the rules, and you're trying to use the rules to advantage your side and disadvantage the other side. And it's not to the advantage of the well-being of the general public.
I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just
Yeah.
sharing what I'm hearing. That's
But they end up gaming the system, and this concept of gaming the system. I mean, when did you first hear the phrase "gaming the system"? That is using the rules to undermine the reason for defining the constitutional charter of the game. And this gaming the system is really, it may not be illegal, but it's certainly not very. It's foolish. It's toxic to the well-being of the system itself.
I will agree that too many treat politics as a sport. Speaking for myself, I absolutely do not.
Go ahead, Sam.
One of the classes I took, I think it was either a political science class or a philosophy class. You had to write an essay about, do you agree with the spirit of the law, or must you agree with the letter of the law? And I was emphatically strong coming on the side of the spirit of the law, because the expression, the literal letter of the law, is set up to be gamed later on. That's why these words that are carefully chosen so as to allow certain loopholes, and they're only known by the people who understand why those loopholes got created. And that's why you can circumvent the quote unquote spirit of the law and just say, oh, I'm complying with the letter of the law. So I'm no doctor of jurisprudence or anything, but for people to play the game according to the letter of the law, I'll say is definitely ground to explore for non-ethical behavior. Over.
That's why I think it's important that we bring transparency into the process where the laws are actually put together, where we could ask those questions. Well, why does this part need to be in there? Well, what about if this? I think we need more of those conversations. We have the Farm Bill coming up right now. There's a lot of information out there. We have people in our conversational communities involved in that. Maybe we should be spending time focusing there.
Until we get Citizens United reversed, this is very, very futile.
I disagree. It's education is never futile.
If education is only this much influence because there's this much money, and you're influencing only this much by education, then to me, it still looks futile.
But what about if it's the educational process that creates the pressure to get rid of Citizens United?
By that time, we'll all be dead. That'll take a generation.
So we just sit and wait.
No, we have to do that plus other things.
Well,
But we have to go after Citizens United.
I agree. And we have to make the process that we're going to use, we have to make that available to people, for people to understand.
you can make it available. I mean, scientists have made the general theory of relativity available to the general public for a century. How many people understand it?
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about simple laws. I mean, in our country right now, you have to go, if you're a regular citizen, you have to go to court to protect or to pull back a right that you're given.
Yeah.
Whereas conversely, you can destroy other people's rights and make them have to defend their right. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, frivolous lawsuits. So you have all these frivolous lawsuits, you end up spending money and time and emotional energy defending against a frivolous lawsuit. And at the end of the day, you know, you've lost, you may have won the case, but you've lost in terms of the cost of having to fend off this frivolity, this corruption of the use of the law. You know, if you look up the word abuse on Wikipedia, you'll see a list of, I think, 120 specific kinds of abuse. One of them is in there's legal abuse, that people use the machinery of the law in an abusive manner to hurt people.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, I've been on the receiving end of legal abuse more than once. Often in divorce cases, you'll experience legal abuse, or in law, or in civil lawsuits if you're in a condo association or something like that. People will use the power of the law to disadvantage people, even though they don't really have, even though the case has no merit.
Right. And my point is that it's people with money or people in power that have that ability. So if you're friends with the chief of police, so to speak, and somebody's bothering you, you could put in a word to him and he could, you know, help you out a little bit, maybe, you know, cause some trouble for somebody else. That's not the way things should be.
So, yeah, the longer you live, the more you encounter these, you know, these discrepancies in the operational characteristics of the system. I mean, it's like you turn on your computer and the operating system starts acting up, you know, and you go, okay, my operating system is doing the wrong thing and it's crashing, or it's, you know, what the hell? And it takes an expert to figure out how to fix it. You can't legislate it and say, I demand my right that you function as advertised.
I shut it down. I shut it down and rebooted.
And buy a new one. Yeah. You know, we're on Zoom, but I have another book that uses Discord. Discord has a nasty feature of crashing older operating systems, but older machines with less hardware power. Discord draws so many resources from the operating system that if your machine is not, you know, the latest and greatest, very likely Discord will shut your machine down.
Really?
Yeah, it has two automatically adopted options: turning on hardware acceleration, which draws on hardware power, and automatically restarting when you boot up your computer. And if you're unlucky enough, like I happen to be on a couple of machines, these two things, which are automatically turned on, crash my system. And good luck turning them off, because you got to use the system that's failing to turn off the features that are causing it to fail. And you got a tiny little window to get in there and disable those two features. So you end up removing it, not using it, provided you can diagnose it, which took me a week to, actually, on one computer, it took me months to diagnose it. As soon as I turned off hardware acceleration, the problem vanished. The other one, I couldn't get in to turn it off. It would crash before I could turn it off.
Good, your hand up, Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, when we talk about laws and abuse, the question that flashed in my mind was, could a properly established law, and properly established to be defined, could a properly established law actually be abused? I think the problem is we put in place laws just as short-term compromises to appease different interests, and they're in no way systemically or systematically considered. For example, $7.25. A simple static number established how long ago? Decades ago? How does that make any sense in a dynamic economy?
Nope.
You know, but it was put in place to say, okay, fine. You got a simple way to comply with the law. And all the businesses are saying, I'm complying with the law.
Yeah.
Does that make it ethical?
Nope.
The law itself was not properly established. And if you take a look at these domestic legal issues, many of those, I'm wondering, were not properly established if, you know, certain partners can use the law against the other with punitive consequences with claims not having been proven. It's happened many times, we all know. So I'm wondering whether or not we could establish some sort of quality checklist for laws or codes that get established. Like, have they really been considered? Are all the what if conditions, you know, really extrapolated? And is that too much to ask of people who write laws? You got lawyers thinking one way, but they're not necessarily consulting systems thinkers.
There's a Boston civil rights lawyer named Harvey Silverglade. He's quite a character, and he's maybe I should say he's a bit notorious. He wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day. And in the law, there's something called antinomy, where 2 or more laws are mutually contradictory. That if you obey one, you're violating the other and vice versa. And Harvey Silverglade wrote a book saying, on average, the average ordinary person commits 3 felonies a day.
Is there an example of one of those? I'm just trying to make sure I'm not going to get arrested tomorrow.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't recite a particular felony, but you know, between the tax laws and other obligations, it's real easy to unknowingly violate a law when you think you're obeying this law, and in fact, you're violating that law. Because if you look at the law books, I mean, they're freaking library.
Mm-hmm.
And you got laws that have been on the books for, you know, decades, even centuries, that people pay no attention to. If you want to go after somebody, you say, I'm going to go after you. Let me figure out which of those bazillion laws you're violating, and then, you know, level that charge against you. And you can do that for anybody. In the Soviet Union, that was a common practice. Figure out which law you're violating for your enemy and go after them. It's like the Benghazi thing. You find some little peccadillo and make a mountain out of it for one person you're trying to disable. And yes,
guaranteed for any sexual conduct right now.
Sexual conduct, yeah, there's probably tons of them for private behavior in your own bedroom. So sure, 3 felonies a day, probably it's a conservative estimate.
That's a lot of laws.
Yeah.
I raised my hand earlier when you were talking about the Discord and how old computers don't work. And I just made me start thinking in my brain of how many things get shifted and changed. And then it renders the old thing obsolete or on the process of being obsolete. But in terms of being a progressive society or moving forward,
Right.
Meaning if a majority of the group is on the new thing, then we have to say sorry to the other person, you know, that didn't get that didn't, you know, that whole capitalistic bigger, better, more.
Yeah.
When you're in a capitalistic society, then you write the laws to capitalism. So if you're not getting the bigger, better, more, sorry, that's not going to be in the books because that's a legacy thing to take care of people that don't want capitalism. And if you don't want capitalism, get out of America. At least we're founded on bigger, better, more. And if you're not in this bigger, better, more place, get the hell out of here.
But the example that was in my career, AT&T, the Bell system, was a capitalist enterprise. It was privately owned and developed telephone network. It was a regulated monopoly, and we were a very successful regulated monopoly, the best and cheapest phone system on the planet. And then the government came along and says, oh, wait a second, that's monopoly. Oh, we have another law against monopolies. You guys are all crooks. Hello, make up your mind. Well, we decided to change our mind, and now we're going to break up the Bell system because it's a very successful, highly efficient, high-functioning capitalist system. But system is a nice word, and we prefer the word monopoly. What is a system? It's a monopoly, right? They pulled the rug out from, that was sort of when I began to think there's something friggin' wrong with our government.
Or there's something really right with it. I mean, when you flip it opposite of, yeah, with all the problems, look at all the things that they're solving. Like, do we ever stop and look at all the things that are being solved? Like right now, if you look at some other governments, they're actually fighting each other like physically. I haven't seen a physical fight break out. I think January 6th was the last, but those weren't people within the government, people outside coming in, physically attacking. Like there's a lot of great things I think that we have that we don't acknowledge. Transportation wise, we got a lot of great transportation systems, even with bridges going corrupt and problems. There's still, millions and millions of people getting from point A to point B across the country. And as far as food shortages go, I haven't seen, huge things on the news of millions of people completely starving to death in America. I mean, yes, there might be certain food problems, but I haven't seen that mass starvation happen yet in America. So there's some sort of systems are working.
Funny things can happen with high functioning technology. I have computer connected thermostats in my house, and I set my air conditioner to 79 degrees because that sort of minimizes the amount of time. It's fine, it's good enough for me. So yesterday, when we had 90-degree temperatures, we had a energy savings event. And so the internet took over setting your thermostat to minimize your use of electricity. So it adjusted my 79 degrees down to 77, which then turned on my air conditioner. And I go, why is it so cold in here? And I went and I says, oh, it's 77. How did it get set to that? I tried to set it back to 79. It wouldn't let me. It actually made it colder than it would have been if they'd left me alone. But they were trying to set it to 77 for everybody, whether that was down or up from the person, the guy next door. So you have these things where technology can do something very strange and doesn't make any sense. And you say, what the hell? I just turn it off.
I was going to say, did you find the default switch and turn that off from that setting?
No, I tried to change the temperature back to 79, and it wouldn't let me. It says, energy saving event in operation. And then when it finally reverted back to normal, meantime, I pushed the button so many times it was up to 85 degrees, the setting. So then I had to set it back to 79 after the event. So, even high technology, they make mistakes. And maybe they'll figure this out and fix it someday, but only set it lower if it's already set it lower, set it to the 77 if it's already set lower. But if it's already set higher, don't set it down. But they didn't put that into the code. They just sent out a blanket, everybody set it to 77, period. What are you gonna do? You laugh. You tell a story and you laugh. Sam?
So I'm wondering whether you guys think the January 6th hearings are going to generate any indictment on Trump at all. To me, it's been obvious for a very long time, even before these hearings, that he was a criminal sitting in the White House.
Yeah.
And yet there's been no action taken by the Attorney General. And when I read that the Attorney General even tweeted or posted something like, oh, we are watching these hearings closely, it's like, fuck, what? You should be completely on top of this by now. What the fuck does it mean you're watching these things closely? So the guy just doesn't seem to be doing anything.
He's being very, very cautious. And I'm sure he's got good reasons for being cautious, but people who want to
I
really
hope you're right.
People who want to see Trump in an orange jumpsuit, I mean, I don't want to see him in an orange jumpsuit. That's not what I want. What I want is good government.
No, I do think we need to see him in an orange jumpsuit. He needs to be made an example of.
Well, okay.
But what about all the bankers from 2008? Do they get to go to the orange jumpsuit?
Yeah, they should also. Absolutely.
That would be great. I'm
As well
down
as
for that.
the
Let's-
Detroit automaker, people that took the $785 billion. Where did that go?
Yep. All the pensions that they stole.
But is that going to prevent the voters from voting for the next successor to Trump? Because it's not that Trump, it's that he has a constituency, and that constituency is still there. So maybe it becomes DeSantis or.
Look, if we're not prosecuting crime at the highest levels, at all levels, then fuck it. Do not call this a country a rule of law.
It
Do
isn't.
not.
Well, even if it were the rule of law, it'd still be chaotic, mathematically speaking, which is not what law and order is supposed to promise.
I also want to say that it's important in making an example is making that example from the beginning. And I think that means waiting for the evidence to come out, and it is clearly coming out. And again, I don't want to be like the ones that were chanting lock her up. I don't want to be just like them. So I'm okay to have this play out, and hopefully more and more people are hearing what the reality is. Because if you look back, at least for me, it's easy to see how people came to the wrong conclusion, because Trump would say one thing, and after all, he was the president, and Mark Meadows would repeat that on TV, and he's another, respected person to them. He was one of their own. And Sean Hannity would then go and repeat it, and he's on a news station, and then all the other news stations would repeat it. And then if somebody did disagree, it was usually on social media, and they were screaming at you like a lunatic. So you're not really going to listen to them. So we have to model it all the way around.
I think you're right, but there has been plenty of evidence. If you take a look at even what has
I
been
agree.
suggested, the emoluments clause has been violated multiple times. That Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are sitting on, what is it, $600 million or $2 billion, whatever the number is, after being just, in office for what, a couple of years? There's enough evidence that you can actually go and pursue, not because you believe it, but because you believe it's worth investigating.
And that's
That
what
stuff-
they would say. That is exactly what they would say about Hunter Biden. And I'm not looking to go there.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. They should investigate Hunter. But I'm saying that it doesn't take very much to
Allegations
understand
against
somebody's $2 billion bank account. That's not hard to verify. Okay?
Right, but you could go anywhere with that. You could go everywhere with that.
And we should. That's what I'm saying.
But there's that other side, which is what Barry was saying about being so litigious. You could just throw an allegation out, and that takes on a whole life of its own when it's not there. And it's
Not if there's no evidence, but if there is evidence, you got to pursue.
Josh.
Just to go with what you're saying, Stacey, and what Barry was saying is, and this is from my understanding of life growing up in the 80s, watching shows like Miami Vice and Al Pacino and Scarface, is if you have enough money, the law is different. So what you're saying is if you can tie them up in court, which is the game, I even read The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump back in the early 90s. And that's the whole game, is if you have enough money and you can tie people up in court long enough, you win, whether you lose later the court case that you've claimed. You stalled those people off. You've tied them up in court long enough to where you got what you wanted. Therefore, if you're rich enough, you can be out on bail, even though you might go to jail. If you can stall that case for 3, 5, 6, 7, 9 years, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. It's not the law, it's how much money you have to tie up the court. So right. I grew up in a very cynical thing, watching Oliver North get put on trial. I watched this in front of the whole world and him plead the fifth, and then watched him 10 years later become a national spokesperson on major television stations. Mm-hmm. That blows my mind. Like, this was the guy that supposedly sold weapons to the Contras for drugs in Panama, and he knew about it and he was blamed for it, and now he's the hero. Literally, he is on television as a person to listen to. So I grew up that cynical. I don't know how you guys grew up, but can you imagine how cynical the people are watching 9/11, watching the war in Iraq that they know was completely bullshit? They lied in front of the United Nations. The amount of cynicism, I think, is the problem. It's no longer having any value or laws. No one gives a fuck. They just want to know, how do you win like that guy that paid off all, like that Jeffrey Epstein? How did he do? We think he's disgusting. He's a pedophile. He's gross. To some, he's a hero. There's a lot of people out there that want to be Jeffrey Epstein because he never technically got caught. He even committed suicide,
Are there
supposedly.
a lot of people? Because not in my circles there aren't. See, that's what
Not
I
in my
think you and
circles
I are-
either.
I have not
Not in
met.
my circles.
But even, I don't mean in your circles, but even in your sphere that you could hear it. I have not even heard one person say that. And I've heard people who love Trump. I've heard people who really disagree with many of my thoughts. I have not heard one person admit to idolizing Jeffrey Epstein, not one.
But we live in America. I'm saying there's a lot of countries that are doing sex trade and sex trafficking and selling people as slaves right now, as we speak in Treya. So those people are like, wait a second, how did Jeffrey Epstein get so big with the government of the United States where he could get caught and not put to trial so many times before he finally got put away? But what he was doing, if you talk to the elites in Hollywood, they all met him. All of the elites, whether it be in Hollywood or the science field, they at some point crossed paths with him, even if it was indirectly. And he was in that sphere of influence. And right now, as we speak, there's probably 30 Jeffrey Epsteins that exist that we don't know about. So my point is that these awful, terrible people, they are idolized by millions and millions of people because they're quote unquote winning the game, because they're not being caught, because we don't know about them. So I'm just trying to say there's a whole nother paradigm of people wanting to do the things that we are trying to say, hey, can we create systems where it's not going to happen? They're saying, can we create systems so it does happen, so I can be the one that wins? And just to look at it from the other side of, there are some atrocious new culture things coming up. I don't even know how to put it without throwing up in my mouth. But there's some really disgusting behaviors that I see in a lot of the young people, and they're idolizing people like the Kanye West and the Kardashians of the world. And I'm not saying they're the worst people, but I don't find any value in Kanye West as a musician or artist, but a lot of people idolize. I heard a guy say the other night, I defend him to my death. I love him. He's a genius. He's amazing. And I will defend him as a genius. And he's got millions of people that will defend him. That's freaking me out.
See, I think the bigger problem is how we judge people based on one aspect of something we know about them or someone that they're affiliated to, and we don't see those nuances for good and for bad. I think that's the bigger issue.
I just think what we're striving for is the goals that we have in America that used to be values. I haven't seen them since my whole life. I've never seen them. I was born in 73. Jimmy Carter was the last person I saw that had some value or goals that made it all the way to the presidency. I haven't seen anyone with those type of values get all the way up the ladder in any, like, very rarely. Even Elon Musk, I admired him, and I'm starting not to, because the more he goes up, he's getting taken down.
Yeah.
Like,
You know,
the system. Yeah, I'm gonna stop. I'm ranting. I'm so just.
You mentioned cynicism a little bit ago, and when I was at MITRE is a federally funded research and defense company that I worked at right down the street from me. And what I noticed about MITRE, the employees at MITRE, is that the engineers who were less than 5 years were becoming frustrated, and they were becoming frustrated because they couldn't actually produce any valuable product within 5 years, and they were becoming frustrated because they just simply weren't producing what they were trained to produce. And the engineers who were there between 5 and 10 years were therefore becoming cynical because they now expected not to be productive. And the ones who stayed for more than 10 years became bitter because now they couldn't change jobs because they've been working for 10 years and had nothing to show in their resume. And this thing going from frustrated to cynical to bitter, I saw this pattern And what that tells me is that where are these proud boys and oath keepers? Where are they coming from? Have they gone from the same cycle from being frustrated in the first phase to cynical in the middle phase to bitter? And the last people you want exercising power are people who are bitter. They're going to be violent, or they're going to be corrupt, or they're going to be doing something to get even, or to, to get some kind of emotional satisfaction that they've been denied for the first three phases of their life. And that's my concern, is that we've got a lot of bitter people. And I don't want to become bitter, but I look at what's happening and I'm becoming chagrined. And I don't want my chagrin to turn into bitterness, but a lot of people do become bitter, and then that's a bad state to be in a society. You don't want your teachers to be bitter. You don't want your politicians to be bitter. You don't want your electorate to be bitter, because they're going to start doing stupid things.
I think I might have shared this with Barry once, but I remember walking through the quad in college and having that thought and promising myself that I would never allow anything to make me cynical. And I've kept that promise so far.
But when you're cynical, you start to lose hope.
That's right.
Hope is the emotional sponsor of research, but if you spend 5 or 10 or 15 years doing research and you're getting nowhere, the hope, which is the emotional sponsor, begins to fade. You think this is becoming looking hopeless. And that's kind of your cynicism. You're no longer predicting success. You're no longer, your enthusiasm wanes. You feel like you're wasting your time and your energy and your effort in something that's never going to come to fruition.
I think that's why we want to surround ourselves with other hopeful people. I mean, that's why I'm here to talk to you guys. I still see hope in this group with everyone here.
But not so naive that you walk into a fool's paradise where you end up, predictably getting nowhere and then becoming discouraged and dispirited. So there's a naivety. You can have enthusiasm, but it may be misplaced.
It's discernment. That's part of growing older and being wise and knowing where to put your energies. And at the same time, sometimes you have to be stupid just to survive. Like, you have to be a little crazy just to want to have that hope, even though there's 99% chance there's no possibility, but if there's 1% chance of succeeding, go for it.
Learn something from your mistakes and then tell the story honestly and openly, that here's the stupid mistake I made. I'm gonna tell a story about it because it might help somebody to appreciate how easy it is to make a mistake and how hard it is to recover from it.
Yep. I think that's, to me, that's what being brave or being a hero is you're not going to succeed. It's the thing that you want to have happen is not going to happen, but you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. And however close you get to success, at least you feel like you tried your hardest, whether you win or lose, or, you feel that you stayed in your own personal integrity and morals and values. And then that inspiration can help thousands of people at a small amount, which to me, that's progressing society, is standing up for what you believe in.
24-year-old Cassidy Hutchinson went into politics in Congress and in the White House. And it only took, a few years for her to read the handwriting on the wall and realize that this culture wasn't what she imagined as a young beginner of her career. And she came out and told the story. She says, this is what it turned out to be. Not what she had hoped for, imagined, or anticipated, but something, far darker. And she told the story, honestly.
And people like that are rare.
Yes, very rare.
When Bernie stepped up, I said, this guy's going to get assassinated. I'm surprised he's not yet. I actually offered.
Yeah, I like Bernie.
I wanted to, if I say this now, but I seriously wanted to just quit my job and become a part of Bernie's security detail, because I knew that he was going to get attacked.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about AOC. I feel the same way about Hutchison. I feel the same way possibly now about Liz Cheney and Kinzinger.
Yep.
These are people who are taking a stand with courage, as that mug has reminded us. Thank you, Stacy. And these people, like the media has been saying, these people have more balls than the director of the national, what, NSA, who's pled the fifth. Was that him? Anyway, there was some general, I believe he was the head of
Flynn.
either Joint Chiefs or the NSA, and he was asked by Liz Cheney on video, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power? And he said, I plead the fifth. To that very question.
Why would you plead the fifth to that question?
Because he had a
Unless
lawyer
you
paid for by
knew
Trump.
that would set you up for the next one that was going to get you incriminated.
It took him a minute and a half for his lawyer to tell him to do that. Who paid for that lawyer? Trump world.
Yeah, well, that's the game you were talking about, Barry. You got to play that game. That's the letter, or you were saying, Sam, the letter of the spirit. In the spirit of the law, that makes no sense. In the letter of the law, it makes perfect sense. You plead the fifth on that one, they can't get you on the next one.
Initially, Cassie Hutchinson had a lawyer paid for by Trump world. She eventually fired that lawyer and got an independent lawyer, and that's when she came forward and offered to testify publicly, and not leave out the stuff that she was being directed to leave out of her testimony when she had a Trump world lawyer sitting next to her. So, yeah.
I don't know much about politics, but the little that I know is if you start in your local community, there's enough drama within your neighborhood with the 20 houses around you. That'll lead you the rest of your life just trying to manage that, let alone the city, being a mayor, let alone being a governor or a senator. Oh, Jesus Christ. Like the larger you go up, forget about it. It's too much
Well,
stuff,
that's
too
why I
many
always
people.
say, if we really, I believe that we need to start small, because if we can't do it small, how could we think that we could do it any bigger? We can't manage 6 of us with 5 friends and we're trying to solve the problems of the world.
Yeah, before you go, Sam, just because I know time is running out, I just want to share, I spent really a good amount of time last weekend for my birthday with my best friend, Dave, who moved to Oregon, has 2 kids and became a bus driver. He's in his early 40s, like 45, actually, 46, I think. But all the politics of being a bus driver for a middle school, he told me on the way to Santa Barbara for 2 hours in the car, amazing. They don't let him use GPS, blah, blah, blah. He has to memorize the routes. If the kids aren't there within 2 minutes, he's got to leave them. If they run to the next stop, he's not allowed technically to pick them up at another person's stop because he missed that one, because the way they have to keep track of where the kids get on and get off. I mean, there's so much politics just being a bus. If he has someone bring a gun onto the bus, maybe I shouldn't be saying this. I hope, Dave, you're never watching this. But I find it fascinating how much you don't know about just being a middle school bus driver. If someone brings a gun, you can't say there's a gun on the walkie-talkie. You have to say there's a code something, something. I'm not going to say the one that he gave, but there's so much politics, and that's just being a little middle school bus driver in a public school. Can you imagine all the politics between a superintendent, the actual principal? That's just the educational system, let alone, trying to get funding for that with the PTA and blah, blah, blah. I'm just saying, when you look at the micro levels of human interactions, it's a lot.
Right.
Sorry, that's
so now to add to that, because this is the point I'm always trying to say when I say starting with our own behavior. So imagine you're the bus driver and you're driving in your neighborhood, you know the route, you know the kids, and you see the kid and he wasn't at the stop. And you get to your next stop and there's that kid, the same kid, you pick him up every day and he's standing there smiling with his mother. They made it to this stop. Are you going to tell her, oh, I'm not allowed to pick you up? Or are you going to break the rule?
right.
And
that's, I asked him, what do you do, Dave? And you know what he said? Don't tell anyone, but I break the rule.
And most
of us, yes,
the right thing to, and most of us would agree in that case, that's the right
thing. But
thing.
he can get fired and lose his whole livelihood and his insurance and his kids.
And that's the bullshit, because that's when, if somebody wants to, they can use the rules against him. if they
That's what
choose.
Barry was saying, exactly.
Exactly.
Breaking a law every day. There's
And you become cynical about the whole system because you see the system is being used corruptly and not for its intended purpose. And you realize that that wasn't a one-off event. That's a recurring phenomenon. This lawfare is a recurring phenomenon. And it used to be that it was in smoke-filled rooms. Now it's just done in the open. The lawfare is just not completely open.
But the law's a good law because if he does say get on, then it sets a precedent for the other kids that can just miss it and go to the other places. And now the whole system's breaking down. And that's where it gets really tricky with laws, is there's a reason that law is there for good purposes. And by him breaking that, that's really bad for the system because that can create more havoc and more chaos.
And that's
So
why
it's,
that's why guidelines can be flexible. The concept of flexible guidelines allows you to be ethical. The
mhm.
absence of flexible guidelines means that if you want to be ethical, you have to break the law. And
And
that's
I
where,
think that solves this whole problem is there needs to be flexibility
Yeah.
so that we can all be ethical. Like,
and laws which are written in word-based languages, which are complete sentences, periods after them, those are not flexible. And if they're written vaguely to allow you to be flexible, then nobody knows what the hell they mean. And now you have to litigate the meaning of vague terms, which is why this whole litigation process is so fraught with danger and manipulation. And it's easy to manipulate the system to get an outcome which the system was trying to be created to avoid in the first place.
See, listening to that story, we all, I think, know what the common sense behavior would be. Let's remove a particular element from that story that Josh took, right? Suppose at the next stop, he found the kid standing there, happy, smiling with his lunchbox, but the mother had dropped him off at that next stop and driven away already.
Yeah, is he going to abandon the kid? Leave the kid sitting there far from home with no communication? I mean,
Yeah.
that would be, you know, well, I don't know what the term would be, child abandonment or something like that. Dereliction of duty. So you have this between caregiving and following the rules. Most people would say, you know, being a good citizen means breaking the rules when the rules don't make any sense. And a lot of times they don't, or they're contradictory. That's an antinomy, that mutually contradictory guidelines. And it's really hard to build a system that has consistent guidelines which you can understand and follow and demonstrate that you're within the guidelines and employing ethical reasoning. It's really hard to show that. Most people can't do ethical reasoning. They don't, first of all, I don't teach it, and it's an elective. It's a college, maybe even graduate level elective for most people.
But most people forget about graduate level, because even in this scenario, most people don't take time to think through, well, what if, and then the examples we just gave. That's something that you can teach. You can teach that early on in school by throwing out those scenarios and giving kids a chance to practice that kind of thinking.
Exactly. And I was lucky because when I was a teenager, after school one afternoon a week, half a dozen of us could go down to the local synagogue, and Rabbi Kripke would in fact present these ethical dilemmas and then attend as we hash them out. And it was really this wonderful thing for a teenager, 16, 17-year-old teenager, to reason through these ethical dilemmas. But I didn't get a chance to take a real college course in ethics until I was in grad school.
Oh, top of the hour.
I'll just say another heuristic I find is the volume of laws indicates the level of distrust the government has in its citizens.
Yep. And in particular, the laws that regulate what officials can do, to regulate the scope of official power. So this abuse of power, and that's what we saw in Nixon, we see it in Trump, we see it in a lot of governors. So the limitations of power, and then people argue over the wording of the laws that regulate the exercise of power among officials who have been given power. And one aide to the president will say, this is lawful, and will say, no, you're going to get criticized, if not indicted, for this abuse of power. Biden will say, I would like to have the Congress codify Roe versus Wade. And to do that, they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster. But he says, I don't have the power to overrule the filibuster. He knows his limits of power, and he will admit them because he doesn't want to, be an autocrat that abuses power. That's worse.
But this is what I mean when I say average people don't know. Average people don't know exactly how to get rid of the filibuster or even think about why that would be good, why that would be bad, regardless of which party's in power.
Right.
Because I think if we could look at it that way, we would come to agreement that the filibuster is not a good idea. That's what I think, but I could be wrong. But again, removing, all the labels and judgments and just looking at something without those specific examples that people are tied to emotionally would be a first step.
They used to have a physical filibuster. You really had to be in the chamber talking. And then they went to a virtual filibuster where they could pretend that they were filibustering, but they didn't actually have to be physically present. And I think the virtual filibuster was a really bad idea because now you don't have to go through the emotions of.
Well, the idea that the whole point is to avoid a vote that would force politicians to go on the record
Right.
and prove that they're going to vote the way they're telling you they're going to vote.
Yeah.
That would be in all of our best interest to know that the person we're voting for is actually going to do it, instead of just avoiding having to put their money where their mouth where whatever, having to stand by their word.
Just reading the chat. I had to look at
Okay,
the
so Sam's leaving is the important point, and it is top of the hour, so I'm going to go too because I would like to shower and get dressed. And
more. Okay. Yeah, it is coming up on, or it is after 2 or more. So
as always, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Very
And,
interesting. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
as soon as I get the high sign, I'll pass along the URL to my hour-long.
Yes, I
model
want to see
view.
that. I definitely want
Sounds
that.
good.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, and if I was going to say, Stacy, if you have an iPhone, there's all these new features in Zoom. I just noticed. I was on a call yesterday. Okay,
Thank you. Bye.
no problem. I was blown away at all these new features. I couldn't believe it. Like blurring the background, and I don't know. It was just amazing, Barry. There's so many new ways to communicate.
None of my computers have the hardware acceleration required to support those features. You need the high-end video cards that can do these things, which you can't do at the CPU level. You have to do them at the graphics adapter level, which means you have to have a fairly modern machine.
I cheated the system, which is I got the second edition iPhone. So it's the cheapest one, the $350 one with the fast processor in it.
Yeah.
So it's got the latest processor, but the crappiest hardware.
Yeah. Although if you use those, they'll burn up your battery pretty fast.
Oh yeah. That's ready for this. You want to see something cool? I just got a new battery system. It's called a Jackery.
Oh, wow. That's not a portable.
It is actually. Look, it's portable.
I mean, well, I guess it is portable. But,
And it hooks to a portable, if you can see in the back, all those solar panels. They're let me see if I can unplug it. It's a pretty cool little system, actually. It's I highly recommend for let me flip this over. Here we go. So you see these little panels?
those are
It
solar
folds
panels?
up.
Oh,
Yeah, they fold up into a real small little compact thing. And then you connect them into this little battery thing. And then out of it, you've got a AC, USB, and DC.
What'd you pay for
So-
that system?
I got lucky. This thing was on, if you see, it says open box. So I got it for half the price. But the whole thing was, I guess, $225 plus $189.
So, yeah,
So-
not cheap.
plus tax.
But you're out in the boonies where if you lose power,
Well, here's the exciting thing. Because of this little system, it's 500 watts. So my Starlink system, this thing in the back here, where is it? This
Yeah.
thing right there,
Yeah, that white
that
thing.
only takes 100 watts. So technically, with these panels, especially at this time of year, I can have internet, and because Starlink now is mobile, I can take it anywhere. I can have this on my car technically if I strapped it to the or park the car and just stick it on the top.
Yeah. Now, I guess you can't have the solar panels flapping out the window, but yeah, if you're parked, you can set them up.
The solar panels are flexible. I can strap them to the top of the car.
Can you really? Okay.
Yep. So I could technically be driving with solar, but since I have a car that has a combustible engine, I can use the 12-volt DC out of the little charger thing. The little used to be a lighter.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So and it's got a what is it called? The thing that turns. Sorry, my brain is
Inverter.
farting right now.
Inverter.
Yeah, inside of a car. What's it called? The thing that creates power again for your battery.
So there's an inverter that, well, there's a battery charger which takes AC to 12 volts, and then there's an inverter which takes 12 volts to 117 AC. That's an
Yeah.
inverter and a chart and a battery charger. Either way.
So this little thing is an inverter battery charger in one built in. There's an inverter to go out to AC, but I'm saying in a regular car, there's a little thing that converts the power of the engine back into battery power.
Oh, the alternator.
Thank you. That's the word I was couldn't remember.
Which is funny because an alternator produces AC, which then you have to rectify to DC to charge your battery.
Really?
Well, see, originally they had they didn't have all. I think maybe 40 years ago, it was just a DC generator. But the problem with DC generator is the voltage was variable. So then it turned out to be more efficient to make an alternator, which made AC, and then rectify it with electronics to 12 volts. So for the last, I don't know, 40 years, they put alternators instead of generators on your engine. So
It is going to AC back to DC and then from DC back to AC.
So the alternator is generating AC, and the AC is rectified back to 12 volt DC for charging instead of using a direct DC generator. Because the DC generator, the voltage depends on the speed.
Why haven't we had hybrid cars for years? Meaning we knew about battery operated cars in the 1800s. Why couldn't we have built, alternators that charged up batteries like always had?
I think the economics, maintenance, life cycle maintenance economics just weren't there until quite recently.
I guess so.
You have to also have the whole infrastructure of maintenance.
Right.
You have technicians. So it takes a long time to get a system where, you have all the resources for sustainable operation over the lifetime of the system. And that's why new systems take, 5-10 years before they become mainstream.
It's also supply chains too. I'm learning. Like I heard a story about Tesla said when they first started, they didn't have a USB cable, so their whole line stopped. A little $3 USB cable stopped the line.
Yep. So there's lots of reasons why it takes a long time to ramp up a new technology to where it becomes economically viable. Because you can produce things that you can't make money at, but then you can't produce them in bulk. You can only have demonstrations.
Yeah, I got a little baby bunny that's lives under my porch that is so comfortable with me being out here. He just came over to say hi. I don't think he knows well enough.
Yeah, what's up, Doc?
Here, let me see if I can show it to you. It's a little baby bunny right there.
Yeah, a little cottontail.
Yeah, and he doesn't know to not come. Like in other words, he's known me as not a threat, so he's just hopping around. Which, I hope he survives. If I don't know. So.
Well, plus he has the capability of reproducing, so that even if he comes to a demise, he'll have the next generation. That's nature's solution to system failures is reproduction.
I think that's the only solution, really. If you look at nature, that's what I did. I got a little kid, so if I come to my demise, they have to carry on the legacy, the genetic. I guess I don't know.
My legacy is simply going to be the scholarly material I leave behind. I'm not going to leave behind any genomes. I'm just leaving behind.
Well, I hope you put it in some sort of format that it's used the way you want it to be used. Ever since I've met you, Barry, it really concerns me that all those writings are somewhere up on the internet, because I know how easy it is to lose information in an old hard drive or something.
Well, I mean, you go into a college campus and you go into the graduate library and the stacks, and all those theses are in the stacks. If you're lucky, 6 people on the planet will ever have read your college thesis, and then it sits molding in some stacks. It never gets looked at again for probably 99% of them.
Are there any institutions that you trust or like that you belong to, meaning colleges or places that you've worked with, that you would want to ask to help curate your content, your information?
Basically, my strategy for the last 30 years is just put it up on the open internet. And if it's any good, people will reproduce it. People will say,
Yeah, that
I
doesn't
know.
work.
Well, maybe it doesn't, maybe it doesn't. And also, like YouTube and stuff, a lot of people put stuff on YouTube, and maybe if you're lucky, tens of thousands of people will look at it, and maybe 1 or 2 will remember it and build on it. I mean,
I don't know.
I go onto YouTube and I look at technical presentations, like say in physics or mathematics or something, and there are gaps and misconceptions in these presentations, either simplifications or whatever. And from time to time, I will introduce a comment that fills a gap or addresses a misconception. And most of the time that goes no place. But if I do it enough times, maybe eventually it will take root and become a meme. And
Yeah.
and it's a crapshoot. It's like research. Research is a crapshoot. Maybe you'll find the solution, and maybe it will elude you. So you do it because it's like an avocation. It's like something to do with your brain. While you're still alive, and still have a functioning brain before you go senile. And I can tell that my cognitive faculties, I can tell that they're gradually declining as I age.
Well, if they didn't, that'd be kind of weird.
Well, it would be unusual, that's for sure.
Yeah, if you got sharper. I just watched a video of a kid in Russia that stopped aging at age 13.
Oh yeah.
So he's in his
The other
30s. Have you seen that?
Where you grow old at triple rate and you become an old man at age 13.
Yeah, and so genetically there's some weird anomalies, and I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's certain people that are anomalies in academic systems or in the publishing world or journalists, that they are the tastemakers, if you will, or think of who's that guy, Michael Moore, that makes documentaries.
Yeah.
Those kind of people that come every so often that just are those research or archive or documentarians, they create the things that last later, the famous works of art, because there's millions of people that are geniuses, brilliant. They've just never been published or known.
Or their work gets discovered 50 years after they're dead, and some researcher stumbles across it in some dusty archive and resurrects it and makes it famous, but the person in their own time didn't make it famous.
Yep. Like my dad is one of those people. He's Michael Bridge. He's been published. He's in the Library of Congress. He's got some books out there, but his work is so, like, he was reading Future Shock and Third Wave and all these things in the 70s that were 50, 60 years ahead. I feel he's about 200 to 400 years ahead. It's not comprehensible by the general public what he's talking about because it's seen as loco.
And that's the problem with being an academic in a narrow field, is that you're going to have a very small audience. In your chosen discipline, you might be lucky to have a dozen people who are following your work and building on it, not just following it, but building on it. You can have people who are following you, but they're not going to do anything with it other than just be entertained by it.
Yeah, I got cynical and bitter in the 90s. I was in a room full of maybe 5 or 6 people that understood what I was talking about because I was so early into the internet. But then 20 years later, everyone was having the same conversation I was having in 1996.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mentioned this week and last week something that I first mentioned in the late 1980s when it was simply dismissed out of hand. And now maybe I think I actually heard a pundit on the radio essentially mention the same idea. So, ideas can be rediscovered or reinvented or reprised, long after somebody has produced it, gone on to something else and been forgotten. Archimedes had the calculus. It was lost for, I don't know, was it 1500 years, however the gap was. He had the basics of the calculus and it was lost. The reason they found it is he had written it in a manuscript somewhere, and it was in a book in some monastery, and some monk wanted to write something, and he bleached the page because they didn't have any pages. So he saw this page full of gibberish, which he didn't understand. He bleached the page and wrote something else, and then around 100 years ago, somebody saw that there looked like there had been something written on the same page, and they used modern optical techniques to recover it. It turned out to be the palimpsest of Archimedes, which had the foundations of calculus on it. Look up palimpsest of Archimedes. That's the name of this story.
How do you write that word, palimpsest?
Palimpsest, palimpsest.
Palimpsest, okay.
Archimedes. It was a very nice story on, I don't know, Nova or one of those PBS series about how he had written up the foundations of mathematics long before Newton and Leibniz, and it was lost until the 1900s, where somebody saw this funky page that looked like it had been bleached.
That's what I find so fascinating, is when it comes out of style, out of fashion, out of the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Someone finds it and puts it in. They're the hero. They're the Newton. Like, for all we know, Newton didn't know anything, and he just stole it all from all his college professors or people. You know what I mean? I mean, he's obviously a genius. We know that, but at some point, he's building, like, no one is an island. We all build off of each other's work, is what I'm trying to say.
Most of what I talk about is not original research. Some of it is.
Yeah.
Some of my the stuff that I'm most prominently publishing is my original research. But a lot of what I talk about is, I didn't originate it. I stumbled onto it and thought, this is really important and needs to be talked about, even though it's unpopular.
Yeah. Well, speaking on that, you saw the quote I put on Facebook about the planets all named by the gods.
Right.
That was a joke by Norm Macdonald, which is why I put quotes around it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of, I'm starting to realize the older I'm getting, the more I think everyone's seen it because it was so popular at the time, but there's already been 3 generations since that joke was told.
But the constellations and the planets, I mean, they did tell stories about them, and they gave these stories names, and the deities became associated with these constellations and the planets. And then the days of the week got named after the deities. So it's all the same source, just the sequence in which it emerged in the culture. But yeah, Sunday and Monday is pretty obvious, sun day and moon day. Tuesday, Tu was the god of war, Mars, Mardi in French or Spanish, right? Miércoles, Mercury's day, and Hermes, the messenger, that was market day. The day of the week where you go to market was Miércoles, market day. And busy, busy, busy. So Hermes was the messenger, the fastest moving planet, the busiest planet, is the deity that's associated with market day. Thor's
You're
day.
blowing my mind right now.
Frigga's day, Friday, which is Venus. Frigga was Venus. Vendredi Day in French, I think it is.
Vendredi.
Vendredi. So yeah, in different languages, you can see that these are the same names as the planet.
No, but you're blowing my mind because these archetypes are still around today, which is, there's a song about, hey, Friday just got paid. It's Friday night. Like, that's the night to go find love because you're done with all the other gods. Like, this
Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday.
Yeah.
Mardi is Mars.
Yep.
Yeah. The the day of Mars. So, and Tu was the other name, and I think which other culture that was the same name. And Mars is retrograde every 23 months. Mars is always moving in the same direction as all the other everything, except when Earth laps Mars in its orbit, and Mars apparently moves backwards for about a month. That contrary motion, that retrograde motion of Mars, made it the god of war. because war is going against everything else. So it's going against the general. So that was why Mars got that reputation for being the god of war. Plus it was a red planet, which didn't hurt. But you have all these stories. Saturn, the slowest moving planet, Saturn Day, the day of rest, because Saturn moves the slowest in its orbit because it's the farthest one out. So you have all these sensible little myths and stories that they make up to, remember. It's like it's these little stories to help you remember stuff.
But it's also little stories that help to define what reality is. Meaning, if you tell me it's Tuesday and I say to you, no, actually, I think it's Pluto Day, and we start arguing about, no, I think it's remember the ants day, and we're supposed to all be entomologists. And in other words, it keeps us all synchronized, telling the same story that we call sanity, that we call society.
Yeah.
But
Woden's Day, Wednesday was Woden's Day. Woden is Odin, the god of ideas, because the god of ideas and the god of business is really the same thing, because it takes an idea to start a business. So Odin, which is Idean, idea in Greek, was Woden's Day. But the Germans decided they didn't want to deify Odin in modern times, so they changed it to Mittweek, midweek. So Wednesday in Germany is midweek. They don't call it Odin's Day or Woden's Day. Like now, for us, Odin, who knows? It's Wednesday. So we didn't change it to midweek. But you go back.
They didn't call it the beginning of the week. They called it midweek. In other words, they kept that same system of
Right.
That's the middle,
Right.
and it all
Renamed it.
resets on
Yeah.
like in the Jewish tradition, Friday is the big day. Friday night is Shabbat.
Friday night is the beginning of the Sabbath. And the Sabbath, the day of rest, because it's named after Saturn, that's when you slow down and you stop moving and you rest, right? Saturn, slow in the sky, it's the slowest moving planet in the night sky. So all of these things, the way it moved, the fastest moving one was Mercury. So that's got to be busy, because he's running around all the time. He's the messenger, Hermes. So yeah, I mean,
what if we redid the whole system? This is just me thinking outside the box. We redo the whole system and change it from our planetary system to multiple galaxies. And we start talking in terms of parsecs and larger space and time. And we create the nebula.
They try to reinvent the galaxy because the 12 the months are the moon, because the moon makes phases. So the month and the days are all after astronomical observations. And that's kind of, I mean, it's easy because you look up in the sky and say, oh, I can see it's a new moon, so it's a new month.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have to ask anybody, you didn't have to keep a calendar or whatever. But those traditions, which date back to the dawn of civilization, persisted to the 21st century. And good luck deciding to reinvent the calendar to be something that makes more sense metrically than the motion of the Earth around the sun, 365.25 days. That's our year, because we always wanted to have the spring, the same month. And so, but you had to reconcile the drifts because these are not commensurate. So the months would drift with respect to the year, and they eventually had a futz around with how many days in a given month. And every once in a while you have to add a leap day, but not every 4 years, every 4 years, except every year that's a century year, except every 400 century years, 4 century years. And so you had to have all these adjustments to keep things in phase, because these frequencies were not, or these periods were not commensurate numbers.
Do you know if the Chinese are on a lunar calendar?
Yeah, I think so. The Lunar New Year. They're on their New Year is like the Jewish New Year. It begins on the new moon of a particular new moon of the year. And
so the Jewish
12 or
calendar
13.
and the Chinese calendar are both lunar. Is that correct?
The new year, the changing the name of the number of the year happens on the day of a particular new moon. I think in Chinese it's late January, early February, maybe.
Yep.
And in Judaism it's in like September, October, new moon.
That's Rosh Hashanah.
Rosh Hashanah, literally head of the year. Rosh
Head of the year.
And Hashanah, the year, head of the year. Yeah. So
That's
these are all astronomical, and they persist even though they don't need to be anymore.
what I'm trying to say is if we were an interplanetary species and we were going from galaxy to galaxy and solar system to solar system, time would have to change quite a bit. We'd have to.
Not only would time have to change, Newton thought that if you had a clock that was a very good clock, it would keep the same time here, there, and everywhere and every when, and that timekeeping was just a cosmic constant. That all clocks kept the same time everywhere and every when. And then Einstein came along and says, that's actually not true. Clocks will speed up or slow down depending on their motion and on the gravitational field strength. So if you take a clock from sea level to the top of Mount Everest, it'll start running faster. If you put it in orbit in a geosatellite, it will also run faster for several reasons, because in motion and the gravitational field both affect the rate at which clocks tick. And that nobody knew that until Einstein came along, and he actually predicted that before general relativity. In 1907, he had enough information to predict gravitational time dilation, gravitational redshift, that if a photon comes out of the sun and has to climb out of the sun's gravitational field, it loses energy, and therefore it changes color, which essentially works out to time dilation. And so this notion of time dilation due to gravity and acceleration, which are the same thing, and due to motion in general, all of that was 20th century, early 20th century. And before that, nobody had a clue that timekeeping was variable. And that observation, timekeeping is variable and depends on gravity and motion. Nowadays, you can't ignore that, because GPS wouldn't work if you ignored it.
Right.
You have to take into account that the clocks on GPS satellites and the clock in your car are not running at the same rate. They're ticking at independent rates, which you can compute with the formulas from general relativity, but the code in the GPS has to have those corrections. It has to use the correct math, or else your location is off by 40 feet or 50 feet or whatever the hell it is, because you didn't take into account differential.
They also have to take into account the movement of the Earth itself, meaning it's not static.
Exactly, the Earth is rotating, and so the motion of
And not just the rotation, I mean the actual bulging.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's minute, but it's happening.
And so the gravitational field strength and the acceleration due to the rotation of the Earth on its axis all have to be taken into account. And that's non-trivial, because it depends on your latitude and your elevation. And so you have to have all of these factors, in the mathematical model. And it's very arcane, which is why they don't try to explain GPS to the average person, because the details of why it actually works is full of very, very tiny adjustments and corrections from altitude and motion and gravity, which if you didn't take that into account, the GPS would you'd be off by a freaking mile or something.
Yeah, and you think about all of that as Earth measurements, geometry,
Right.
But then go to another planetary system where imagine physics is completely different.
Right, where the year and the day don't have any meaning, because the planet doesn't turn around with respect to the sun in 24 hours, doesn't go around the sun in 365 days. So your day, your 24 hours in a day, none of that makes any sense except on the surface of the Earth. And even then, the Earth is slowing down in its rotation because of the friction from the tides and the friction in the interior of the Earth. The Earth is actually slowing down. So the days are becoming slightly longer by a fraction of a second, which is why we have to have leap seconds.
And then the temperature changes, meaning let's just say you have a planet going around the sun that's changing temperatures, heating up, cooling down as it goes around its sun in another solar system. Those temperature changes are going to change the actual physical properties of the elements that are on those planets.
Absolutely. So you have all these obscure factors to take into consideration, and your average layperson just doesn't care, has no need to know, just simply says, when the guy on the radio says it's now 12 noon or 1:30, you know, the fact that
You know-
your watch no longer agrees, you just correct your watch.
You know what I find really fascinating is that we all find things to value and care about. Meaning, if I was a nail person and I did nails for a living,
Yeah.
and I said, you know what, your average scientist like Barry Court doesn't care about his cuticles, and they just don't pay it any mind, and they're so oblivious, they're so stupid when it comes to how they keep their nails. What is it? There you go. Are you okay?
Yeah, I've had that, whatever, I don't even know what this is called. I've had this for years, this discoloration of my right thumb. Who the hell knows what it is?
You see, that was, you just exemplified my point exactly, is to an average cuticle specialist or a nail, they call them nail technicians,
Right, that would be a
you are a
disaster.
complete, yeah, they know everything about that. In other words,
They-
that's their
They
business.
want me to go to a dermatologist and, figure what the hell that is and see if they can fix it. I mean, it's a discoloration. I don't know what the hell it's caused. I mean, I've never
I
looked
guess
at
what I'm trying to say is, as human beings, we're so specialized in things that we think everyone should know about. So the average when you say layperson doesn't know these things, they think that same thing about you and your dermatological understandings.
why do I care about particle physics? I mean, it doesn't affect their life.
Right. And why do I care about the skin on my neck or on my, what, like my ashy elbows? Why do I care? I don't care. I don't see my elbows.
Yeah, just don't put them in your ear.
Yeah, that's
Your elbow in your ear. Don't put anything in your ear
Same.
that's smaller than your elbow.
I've met people that were supposedly the stupidest people on earth, like dumb people from, country living. And they are so stupid on so many things that we take for granted of just regular city life. But they can show you how to put their hand in a hole and catch a catfish. Like they know things that we could never, how to eat caterpillars and they know things that are, you know what I mean? Like we have such, I guess what I'm trying to say is from everybody's vantage point and perspective, there's a lay person for everything. Like you're a caterpillar layperson. You don't understand which caterpillars to eat in Tennessee.
Exactly. So, we have our niche where we have some mastery and we have the rest of the culture where we have no mastery.
Yep.
So, such as life.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's what I try to see, the brilliance of the stupidest people and the stupidity of the brilliant people.
Yeah.
Like Einstein was a genius on so many levels, but probably retarded when it came to cooking, Armenian food. I bet he wasn't very good at it.
I don't even know if he cooked at all. I mean, I don't know of any.
There you go.
Chances are he just, got his meals at the cafeteria every day. Who knows?
And maybe he was a premier Italian chef. We don't know. I don't know.
He may have had, I think he probably had a house. I'm pretty sure he had a housekeeper. I think he had a housekeeper. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure he did.
He probably wasn't very good at cleaning a bathtub.
Well, neither am I.
Neither am I. I guess what I'm trying to say is what we claim to be valuable and what society thinks of as values is so different all around the world and all around the solar system, probably, and the galaxy.
Yeah. I spent my life, making technology work at, functional and economically. So that your telephone, you picked up, and you got a telephone, it worked, and you call went through and you could hear. And people take that for granted, but what, you can't take that for granted. There's a lot of work that went into making the telephone system work reliably, efficiently, functionally, and at very little cost per month. I mean, people would pay, I think, $15 to $20 a month for a phone line back in those days when we were doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing.
I didn't appreciate the phone service till I learned about digital subscriber line before cable came in, when I had to run. I said, wait a second, you're telling me there's no copper wire from the street to my house, and you have to charge me hundreds of dollars to run a special wire from wait, how is and then I started looking. I remember the day, Barry, I looked at all the telephone lines in my city, and I just marveled at the infrastructure of how much, the lines are for the telephone up in the sky, like those poles, and that infrastructure is amazing.
Yeah, there was a copper wire all the way from the central office along the poles and into the base of my house and then to each telephone outlet. And it was a little 26 gauge copper wire, which was designed to carry a low-grade voice frequency up to 3 kilohertz, because that's all a telephone is up to 3 kilohertz. It's not hi-fi, because that's all you needed for voice. You're not singing, soprano on the telephone. If you did it, you wouldn't sound right. It was designed to run up to 3 kilohertz, which is good enough for voice. And in DSL, they figured out how to get much more information into a copper wire that was only designed originally to run an analog signal of 3 kilohertz.
When did they go digital? What year did it go from analog to digital on the main lines?
Oh, so the trunk lines, the intercity trunk lines went digital, I think starting maybe in the 70s. So first they did it on the big trunk lines, and they worked their way down from the big fat long distance lines from analog to digital until eventually they got digital all the way to your house. The last mile was the hardest part because you had these little 26 gauge wires where you had to go digital over the line. And they eventually got that worked out, but that took very advanced electronics and engineering design. And those only went to, I think initially you only had 3 kilobits on DSL. Then they got to 6 kilobits. And I think it maybe topped out at 6 kilobits for a pair of 26 gauge wires. And then they eventually put in fiber. Once they put in fiber, that was it. Now you could have 100 megabits. But yeah, I think I had 6. Did I say kilobits? Or was it 6 megabits? I guess I had 3. I'm sorry, it's 3 megabits.
It would have been megabits for the DSL.
And then 6 megabits. By the time DSL went obsolescent, I think I was up to 6 megabits, which is basically the same as television. Because a color television channel is 6 megahertz. The amount of radio frequency bandwidth for television in the old analog days was every channel, like channel 2, used 6 megahertz of the spectrum. And for that, you could get 30 color frames a second, at 600, whatever it is, 525 lines and whatever. And eventually, of course, they went to high definition, which then used digital and was able to use the bandwidth much more efficiently because you use, there's a lot of redundancy. In an analog, every single pixel had to be sent individually by analog. But you look at this to say, well, most of this picture isn't changing. So if I could say, well, this pixel here is the same, for the next 12 frames, then why should you send the same value? Just say same. So you had to have a frame that remembered the previous value, and you only had to send the information that says this pixel has now changed by this amount. And by doing that, which is very high speed frame computation, they could reduce the amount of information you transmitted because you didn't have to transmit every single pixel afresh. And that was all very, very technically advanced stuff, state of the art.
Yeah, what you're talking about makes me think that have a long way to go between sending matter from place to place, just in terms of transportation and shipping supply chains and inventory, yada, yada, yada. If we got efficient, we would have the ability, like a printer would no longer print on a wooden piece of paper from a tree.
You could print this mouse locally instead of manufacturing it in Taiwan and shipping it, all the way to the US. You could, in principle, print this locally. Now, they did the same thing with newspapers. They used to send the New York Times physically. They would print it, and then they had multiple printing plants in Chicago and Los Angeles. And eventually, you didn't have to print it at all. You could just send it electronically and view it on a screen and send the information, but you didn't have to transfer it to ink and paper. But this whole thing about, digital composition, long distance printing. So little by little, you sent less and less material over long distances. You only sent the information, you sent the blueprints. And the blueprints then could generate the physical object in multiple printing or fabrication facilities until you got, here I have a printer in my house. No, we didn't have printers in our houses until what, I don't know, 30 years ago or something.
I just watched not to change the subject, but the same idea. The company Boston Dynamics, they put out a little recruiting video of a new robotic technician that they hired about 3 years ago at Boston Dynamics. And he was showing how anybody in any field could get a job in the robotics world because of how many different industries it's disrupting and how many different types of people they need to help create robots for these different industries.
I saw a story yesterday. This will interest you. So there's an AI system called GPT-3, and a researcher.
I've used it.
A researcher said to GPT-3 system in one facility where he worked, he says, GPT-3, write a scholarly article about yourself, about GPT-3, with, suitable for peer review with references and all this stuff. And this system wrote an article about GPT-3, about itself, and the guy looked at it and says, this is publishable. I should be able to send this to a peer-reviewed journal in artificial intelligence and say, this is an article about GPT-3 written by GPT-3. And that led to a whole bunch of legalisms. Can an AI be the author of an article, including its own biography?
Well, you saw what they did in, I think it's Abu Dhabi. They gave actual rights to an AI as a citizen of the country.
Yeah. So,
is that Abu Dhabi? Do you know what country that was? Am I making that up? It was Saudi Arabia, or I don't know where it was.
Abu Dhabi is the name of the city, not the country.
Yeah, Abu Dhabi's the name of the city, but I can't remember which country it was. I believe it was one of the either United Arab Emirates countries, or
it is one of the United Arab Emirates. Those small countries adjacent to Saudi Arabia.
One of those gave full rights to an AI, I think in 2015, maybe, which made me start to think this is just a crazy thought I've been having with AI getting so prominent in this. You saw in the news this week about the Google engineer talking about the
sentient chatbot.
Yeah, so it makes me start thinking, if a country, if a large entity gave actual rights to an AI, did they give it a bank account? Did they give it, signing legal rights for companies? Like, what did they do back then to set it up for 2024, 2 years from now?
Basically, they create a corporation. The corporation owned the robot. But the question, but can the robot itself be an incorporation that's just the robot, creates a corporation? I don't see why not.
But this is my point is, what if, Barry, that giant, I forgot the name of the company, Aramco, I think it's called, the big, huge oil company that went public. Yeah, they went public on the American Stock Exchange. So just imagine if a company like that is actually the CEO or on the board is a bunch of AIs that are running it.
Right. In principle, it can be. A lot of systems are completely autonomous. When you go to a server, there may be humans who are involved in setting up the server, but then the server runs autonomously without an operator physically operating it. There are technicians who can fix it if it fails or whatever, pay the bills, for electricity. But most of these servers, I got a machine over there that's my web server. It runs autonomously. Once in a while, if the power fails, I got to reboot it, set it back up again. But it runs unattended. I've got machines in this house that my heating system runs unattended. My refrigerator runs unattended. A lot of systems just run unattended until they have a failure mode or something where they have to go in and intervene and fix it. And sometimes when they fail, you just throw them away and buy a new one. Don't bother.
I'm sort of getting blown away, meaning all my troubleshooting, all the things that I have to interface with my systems, they can automate those now.
Yeah.
So every so many days, it clicks in, checks the trouble, runs the button that I would have to run, does the system test, updates.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
My laptops are sitting there. They wake up in the middle of the night. They check for updates in the middle of the night. They download, install the updates, and then they go back to sleep for a certain amount of time. So they wake up automatically and check to see, do I need to do any maintenance? And most of the time that works completely unattended and you don't have to, once in a while it glitches.
Yep.
And like the last update to Discord overloaded the hardware and it glitched. But beyond that, it'll run unattended and do its own updates if you set it to do automatic updates. And so lots of systems. I mean, the sun runs unattended. The moon runs unattended.
Or does it? Maybe it glitches every once in a while and we don't know who's getting that signal.
So yeah. So unattended operation of complex systems is pretty commonplace.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, when people die, somebody's got to take the body and, cremate it or bury it. But, people are pretty autonomous up to a point.
I feel like for all the complaining we do about systems that don't work, we don't do enough praising the systems that do work. Meaning,
Actually,
if there's 2 billion people that, go ahead. What were you saying?
But when I was working on the telephone system, the best thing that happened is nobody ever complained about it. Of course, it also meant they didn't praise it, but you will get criticism before you'll get praise. So if people are commenting on a system, chances are they're not lauding it. They're identifying a shortcoming. And so being unnoticed was a sign of success in engineering the telephone network. You didn't want to be noticed. It meant you're doing your job.
Yeah, and isn't that what we need to switch the paradigm of human thinking, is to praise the unnoticed instead of complaining about the noticed, meaning there's so many more things that are running ubiquitously in the background in societies.
Oddly enough, worship was introduced by theologians as a way to appreciate the fact that the top 6 inches of the planet's surface provide soil to grow the crops that feed us, and we should appreciate that. We should be thankful for the food and the sunlight and
That's what I love about Japanese culture. When you go to eat, they say itadakimasu, which is thank you to all the energies of all of the things that went into this meal.
That's basically worship, is essentially thanking the autonomous systems that are running, without any human intervention to provide the sustenance of life.
Wouldn't that give more value to each moment if we were spent, like they asked in the Muslim religion, how many times should we praise God? And I think Muhammad said every day, all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I look at myself and I say, am I gaining any ground right now, or I'm just sitting here spinning my wheels? And if I find that I'm going around in circles spinning my wheels and I'm not gaining any ground, I need to rethink that and say, I need to redefine my practices so that I'm not stuck in a rut, which gets boring. Right? And so the boredom is your first clue that you're stuck in a rut. And I think I need to find something to get more enthused about so I can feel like I'm gaining ground. That's why I was so excited to find out that this interview that I recorded 10 years ago is now going to finally be put up on YouTube, and people are going to have a chance to hear from my own voice what I was saying 10 years ago when nobody else was paying attention.
No, that's fantastic. I found a recording of myself I just posted on Facebook from 2007. And I reposted it in 2012 and no one saw it. And I just reposted it in 2022 and I'm sure no one's going to see it.
But I mean, one of the things I like about Facebook is that every year it reminds you of what you posted on that anniversary date. And a lot of things come back up. Now it's coming back up from as long ago as 10 years ago. So, because I've been on Facebook that long, and stuff comes up that I'd forgotten about. And it's stuff that I thought long and hard about and wrote a carefully crafted little piece on it. And it comes back up and I go, oh yeah, that's worth reprising. And I'll simply, add a fresh comment at the bottom, which is simply a repeat of the title. And that causes people to discover something that I've forgotten that I've written. And
what you just said is what I wanted to do with these recorded GCC calls, of putting them in a trust, is someone 70, 100, 4,000 years into the future, if they could say, you know what, I wonder if people were talking about this stuff ever. actually in 2017, there was a bunch of people that were talking and having this conversation. Let's listen.
Yeah. I mean, I had published my reservations about Trump in, what was it, 2015 would it have been? Because 2016 was the year of the election. Yeah, 2016. And I said, he's a textbook case of the dark tetrad, this dark personality, personality disorders, and, the last kind of person you'd want in office. I was posting that routinely. I don't know how many people saw that or disagreed with it. I have no idea, except that, it certainly didn't change the vote. But I mean, it's like Hillary. You see these memes of Hillary, I told you so. I mean, she got a lot more publicity than I did, and she was, saying this guy's a crook. He's a puppet of Putin and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but they're playing a game that we're not involved in because it's a country club game. They're all in the same country club, and their families have been playing this game with each other for many generations.
so I knew.
You feel what I'm saying, though, Barry? I'm saying the Bush family has been
Oh,
around since
sure.
Prescott Bush, and they were part of the country club in the 1800s.
Yeah,
And so was the Clintons family, like
Yeah.
Bill Clinton's great grandfather.
sure. And his wife was a law student way back in her college days. So yeah, sure.
And if it wasn't them directly, it was their uncle or aunt that got them into the country club that helped them to become the governor of Arkansas. And then, so their families is what I'm saying. The people of their circle of influence have been playing games against other families
Yeah.
for hundreds of years, if not thousands.
The monarchy did the same thing. The monarchy was having these alliances, these monarchical marriages and fights. Sure. So it's the same dynamics as the monarchy, except it's done not at the level of the monarchy, but the level of the governors and the senators and that
But it's
level.
the same thing, just disguised. I mean, those country clubs, have you ever been in some of these country clubs?
Oh, surely not.
Check it out. In Boston, there's quite a few if you want to go to some of these prestigious.
Even in Nebraska, they had this thing called Exarban, which is Nebraska spelled backwards. And they had a coronation every year, the king and queen of Exarban. And it was like some businessman and some socialite debutante. And they would become the king and queen of Exarban. And they had this big annual pageant. And Exarban was also a little bit like, it was also a racetrack. I mean, it was a building, it was a racetrack, and they had these big social events. Nobody that I knew was a member of Exarban. It was this elite Omaha or Nebraska, the genteel. And you could turn on the television every year and see the coronation of the king and queen of Exarban and the whole whole pageantry and all that stuff. And it was just like, Game of Thrones. And it was just another. And probably there was a lot of jockeying to who gets to be the king of Exarban and who gets to be the queen and all this kind of stuff. So,
yeah. I guess what I'm saying, when you get into politics, you think it's democracy and we're all part of the system. But then you get up to a higher level where there literally is a person that goes, you know what? I don't like the cut of his jib. And 400 years ago, he did my granddaddy wrong or something, they did whatever. So just because of that, I'm going to be a douchebag and I have $17 billion. And I'm going to spend $2 billion behind the scenes to make sure that they do not get into office.
yeah. So yeah, bitterness. Money and bitterness is a toxic cocktail.
Yeah, but from the outside looking in, from us watching the news, the average ordinary citizen, it makes no sense.
It's a soap opera. People love soap operas. So you could tune into a daytime or primetime soap opera, made up characters, and people were just totally transfixed by these, soap operas. And this is, character-driven dramas. Soap opera is a character-driven drama. And in that hour-long interview, I ended the whole thing by talking about character-driven dramas and soap operas. You could find them on the social networks. You find it in Wikipedia, you find it in social networks, you find it politics. These character-driven dramas are sort of our entertainment. Get out.
Barry, will you tell me when that you have the rights, or when that guy gives you the permission to post that link. I would love to see it.
Yeah, probably, I'm hopefully just before the weekend is out, he'll write me back, because he basically said, he says, I've uploaded this unlisted. I want to give you the chance to look at it and suggest any edits. So I looked at it, and I said, "No edits, publish it, go ahead and publish it, but I don't want
Are there other people that he's waiting to get confirmation that are in the documentary, or?
No, because, first of all, the documentary never got made.
Okay,
He was going to he's going to compile a documentary called the Encyclopedia Game. And I was going to be one of the commentators, but he ran out of money. So he never created a documentary, but he still had all the footage from these interviews. And he finally put the footage of me in, because you can only record, I think, 20 minutes or whatever it was on the digital cameras of the day, because you had to keep changing the cartridges. He had to splice all of the segments together, and then make it and put it up on YouTube. So he finally got around to splicing. When you see it, you'll see cuts. When he came to the end of the tape, he had to stop me and restart a new cartridge. Then I had to pick up with the middle of the sentence. So you'll see
got it.
half a dozen cuts where there's a jump cut where I repeat the last remark. But he finally spliced it all together, and it's fine. The only thing that it needs is occasionally I will slur a word. And if you didn't know what I said, you wouldn't figure out what I said. So it needs a text transcript where I go in and fill in the words where the transcript couldn't quite figure out what word I said.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get a text transcript, because I know when they do speech to text automated stuff, that there's a lot of words they get wrong. Something like 5 to 10%. You got to go in and fix them. And if you say,
have you been watching our transcript as we've been talking?
No, I don't have it turned on, but I know from other cases where it is turned on that it misses a lot of words.
Yeah, I actually like to, ever since I got the first Dragon Naturally Speaking.
Yeah.
You know what? I just got a text from Q, so I should probably go because the baby's having trouble sleeping.
Okay.
But yada yada yada. Definitely send it to me. I would love to see it when you get it.
Yeah, I'll reveal the URL as soon as Phil says it's unlisted.
Sounds good.
Or until he gives me the green light to reveal the as still unlisted URL.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Whatever
Okay.
is there. All right. Have a great day, Barry.
Bye-bye. Stop recording there if I can. No. Can't stop it. I'll just end it.